meeting to order. Just to remind people that once the gavel is down, no more pictures are allowed in a committee room. I see a few of them out. Then today we'll be furthering our study on the Budget Implementation Act C-24, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on February 27th of this year, and other measures. So with us this afternoon we have 6 witnesses, and we'll start with you, Mr. Leach, who's the Associate Professor, Alberta School of Business, University of Alberta. The floor is yours, and we try and keep opening comments to about 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to speak to you today to express my support and to provide context for the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act, Section 5 of Bill C-74. This legislation is the backbone for the federal government's approach to climate change, will complement the measures already taken by Canada's provinces. It will allow provinces without carbon pricing systems to benefit from the federal architecture to impose a carbon price, and will allow them to receive revenue collected from it. This combination, federal policy with provincial level flexibility, recognizes the diversity of provincial economies, yet allows for federal leadership on climate change, which is so important. This bill guarantees that carbon prices will apply on nearly all emissions from energy use in Canada, from the cars on the 401, and yes, the 417, to the largest industrial facilities in Canada. The bill provides for the federal price to be applied in provinces without sufficiently stringent carbon pricing policy. Assuming no changes in provincial policy, implementation of this bill would likely exempt the provinces of BC, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, and most likely Manitoba. These provinces, home to 90% of Canada's population and responsible for 83% of Canada's emissions, would be potentially subject to this legislation were their domestic climate change policies to be significantly weakened. So why a carbon price? Simply put, carbon price leverages the power of the market to enable emissions reductions at the lowest possible cost. It does not rely on governments to determine who should emit or what technology they should use to do so. It relies on individuals to make decisions where they are best suited to do so. The carbon pricing plan proposed in this bill, just like current policies in BC, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec, puts a price on carbon emissions from most sources, not just large industrial facilities. The broader is the price on carbon, the lower will be the price to meet any given target, or the greater will be the emissions reductions from any given carbon price. And of course, as we know, carbon emissions in Canada are not just a big industry issue, and certainly not just an oil and gas issue. Do carbon prices work? That's probably a question you're hearing a lot in this committee. And the answer is simply yes. We have plenty of evidence from BC's carbon tax, which has been in place since 2008, that carbon prices do reduce emissions below where they would otherwise be. And if you want to look up some work on this, work by Nick Rivers at Ottawa U, among others, has shown this conclusively. This doesn't mean they're magic. They will not always lead to emissions to be lower than they have historically been, especially when macroeconomic growth is rapid, something we've seen in Alberta for years, or when technological change is slow. But let me assure you and put on the record that demand curves slope downwards, despite frequent claims to the contrary. When emissions have a price, we'll use fewer of them. If you think of innovation and technological change as the solution to climate change, a carbon price is your best policy choice. When asked how governments could spur innovation in green tech, Syracuse University's David Popp provided 5 rules for government in a report published by the CD Howe. The first of these, carbon price, carbon price, carbon price. Why? In his words, supporting technology development means not only investing in new technology, but also creating demand for clean tech throughout the economy. And that happens organically with a carbon price. A carbon price is also a useful alternative to governments picking winners with regulations and subsidies. So why not just have a big federal policy? Why not just have a one-size-fits-all federal plan in this regard? I think that would be a poor decision because our provincial economies are very different. I've done a lot of work in Alberta, Ontario, Quebec. Our emissions profiles are very different, as are the means to reduce emissions. A couple of examples. If you look at some of our provinces, we still generate a lot of our electricity from fossil fuel sources, whereas in other provinces, electricity is already zero carbon. That in of itself provides different opportunities. If you look at my home province of Alberta, about a quarter of our GDP comes from sectors which are described as emissions intensive and trade exposed. It means they're vulnerable to possible emissions leakage. So Alberta designed a program to mitigate that. If you tried to pick the same policy to work for Ontario as to work in Alberta, you'd find that the policy didn't fit very well. Finally, of course, the use of revenues. You can see different choices made across the country to meet provincial goals. So I think the federal government has chosen wisely here, not only providing the provinces with the means to select their own policies, but also to determine the uses of revenue from these federally imposed carbon prices. Here again, I think this is an area where provinces are going to have different priorities and different ideal uses of revenues. Trevor Tombe recently put forward a proposal for Ontario, which would see, without altering the income distribution, a carbon tax used to expand the sales tax credit by 80% and to eliminate the healthcare premium. Obviously, in Alberta and BC, we've chosen more progressive policies, which have made the bottom 40 to 50% of households better off with the carbon tax than they were without. And I think these choices are better made provincially than federally. Just to wrap up, I do have a couple of concerns with this legislation. I'm concerned a little bit with the discretion provided to the Governor and Council to apply measures to provinces. Section 189 holds the Cabinet may take into account any factor it considers appropriate, including the stringency of carbon pricing mechanisms, to determine whether a province should be covered. Here, I'd like to see a cleaner definition of stringency. And conveniently, Price on Carbon gives you that. And a test which, judged by that standard, would prevent an outcome where Cabinet sees fit to apply to one province a price on carbon far higher than it would allow to apply in others. I'm also concerned a bit with Section 188, which determines the distribution of revenues from the carbon tax to specified provinces. And I think what we want to make sure of here is that the implications are clear, that the participation or the revenues collected in these bills will be distributed to the provinces independent of other transfer decisions of the federal government. Overall, though, it's my pleasure to be here with you today to express my support for this bill. Merci pour votre temps et votre attention.
Thank you very much for your time and attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Turning now to Mr. Kenney, who's been in this room near that chair in a former capacity, I believe. Jason, welcome, now Leader of the Official Opposition of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great to be back. I've been on both sides of the table and this side too, so wonderful to be back. Mr. Chairman, I'm leader of the United Conservative Party in Alberta. We just had our founding annual general meeting wrapped up yesterday, and 98% of our members voted in favour of a policy to repeal the carbon tax imposed by the incumbent NDP government in Alberta. And so I am here in opposition to Bill C-74, to Section 5 of it, to the proposed federal carbon tax. The NDP government in Alberta imposed its carbon tax 5 months after the last election. Hilariously, they forgot to mention their carbon tax in that election. It was the largest hidden agenda in our province's political history, and the largest tax increase in our history. They raised it by 50% on January 1st of this year, and are now committed to raising it by a further 67%, and they're blaming Bill C-74, the federal carbon tax. Mr. Chairman, I can report that there have been over a dozen public opinion polls taken on the carbon tax in Alberta in the past 2 years, which show consistently that 2/3 of Albertans oppose this tax. They oppose it not because they are indifferent about the environmental questions or the challenge of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, but they oppose it because Albertans understand with their good common sense that punishing consumers for living normal lives in a cold northern economy, in a cold northern climate and an advanced economy is not a responsible environmental policy. And they understand that making it more expensive for seniors to heat their homes when it's 30 below outside, as it was just a couple of weeks ago in Alberta, or for people to drive, to pay more in order to drive to work, they understand that punishing people for simply living their lives doesn't make sense. The theorists who support carbon tax will generally admit that it is a so-called Pigovian tax, by which they mean that there should be a taxation on negative behaviors like sin taxes on booze and cigarettes. Well, Mr. Chairman, most Albertans don't think that heating their homes and driving to work and running their small businesses is something that should be punished. I recently visited the Sundre Seniors Centre. It's a wonderful organization that keeps seniors active in their community. They do that for only $18,000 a year, completely volunteer organization. They're now spending 7% of their annual budget on a carbon tax they can't afford, which is about to go up by another 67%. They don't get a rebate. They don't get any prospective offsetting tax cut. They're looking at possibly having to close down their senior centre. So there are real human impacts that the advocates don't talk about, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, and that is why I'm pleased to report to you that if Albertans elect a United Conservative government in next year's provincial election, the first bill that we will introduce in the legislature will be the Carbon Tax Repeal Act. We will completely repeal the NDP carbon tax. If the federal government then seeks to impose the powers proposed in this bill on Albertans through a federal carbon tax, we will see the federal government in court. Our official opposition is making an application to the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal to seek intervener status to join the Saskatchewan government's constitutional challenge of Bill C-74. And should we be in office, we will ensure that we'll do everything we can to get Alberta before the courts on the same issue. Mr. Chairman, we believe this is an unconstitutional intrusion into the provincial power exclusive power to tax for provincial purposes. It's also an unequal application of a federal power on different provinces which are being treated differently. And Mr. Chairman, I close by pointing out that the advocates of carbon taxes know that the $50 tax is just the beginning. Environment Canada has said they intend that in order to hit the Paris targets, it has to go to $300 a ton. This is the frog in the pot syndrome. All of the carbon tax advocates here are simply trying to get people used to paying more to heat their homes and to drive to work so that they can continually raise this to give more revenue to politicians and more control to government. A future Conservative government in Alberta will do everything we can to fight that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kenny. Turning then to Canada's Eco-Fiscal Commission, Mr. Bugin, Executive Director.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. I represent Canada's Eco-Fiscal Commission. We are a panel of senior economists from across the country, supported by a cross-partisan advisory board with representatives from industry, civil society, and perspectives across the political spectrum. The Commission's mandate is to identify and support policies that make sense for both the environment and for the economy. In other words, to identify policies that achieve environmental objectives at lowest economic cost. Our research and analysis clearly indicate that carbon pricing is such a policy. Today, I'd like to unpack three key aspects of carbon pricing as it relates to Bill C-74. First, carbon pricing is effective in reducing GHG emissions. It creates incentives for businesses and households to choose lower carbon activities and technologies. It creates demand for low carbon technologies, and it drives low carbon innovation. We know that prices affect choice all through the economy, but there is also, as Mr. Leach alluded to, ample empirical evidence that carbon pricing works. In BC, according to academic research, GHG emissions would be 5 to 15% higher had BC not implemented its carbon tax. More specifically, for example, in the absence of the tax, vehicles would be 4% less efficient, per capita gasoline demand would be 7 to 17% higher. Ecofiscal's own modeling analysis from 2016 found that a carbon price rising to $50 per ton in 2021 and $100 per ton by 2027 could reduce emissions by about 170 megatons in 2030 and 80 megatons in 2022. Second, economists agree that carbon pricing is the lowest cost approach to reducing GHG emissions. Our same analysis finds that the costs of carbon pricing, even when rising to $100 per ton by 2027, would only slightly affect economic growth. How revenue recycled affects these estimates. At worst, carbon pricing would reduce growth rates by about 1/10 of a percentage point. But if revenues were used to cut income taxes, as provinces have discretion to do under the Pan-Canadian framework, the impacts on growth would be negligible. Economic growth would remain positive and strong. Alongside these small costs, we must also consider benefits. Carbon pricing can reduce GHG emissions, helping Canada to achieve its 2030 target. Doing so will also contribute to global efforts to fight climate change and avoiding the costly impacts of a changing climate. These reductions will also have benefits in terms of reducing local air pollution and thus improving local air quality and health. Canada has ambitious targets for emissions reductions in 2030. Achieving these targets will have costs, but carbon pricing can achieve those emissions reductions at lowest possible cost. Other policies, including subsidies or prescriptive regulations, will cost more. Regulations that require specific outcomes or technologies in specific sectors are less flexible and thus have higher costs. Carbon pricing does not require preconception as to where in the economy or the country the lowest cost opportunities for emissions reductions might exist. The flexibility of carbon pricing also creates powerful incentives for clean innovation. Subsidies to clean technologies require picking specific technologies. Furthermore, they're often paid to businesses or individuals who would have adopted the clean technology even in the absence of the subsidy or with a smaller subsidy, thus raising costs. Finally, well-designed carbon pricing can reduce emissions while also protecting the competitiveness of Canadian businesses, even while some of our trading partners do not price carbon. In particular, Ecofiscal's analysis of output-based pricing suggests that this approach, as included in Bill C-74, can provide transitional step support to vulnerable industries. It creates incentives for industry to reduce GHG emissions by improving emissions performance, not by reducing production or investment in Canada. This is the approach that Alberta pioneered, and especially those in emissions-intensive and trade-exposed sectors, have expressed clear support for output-based pricing as a way to cost-effectively encourage emissions reductions without undermining economic competitiveness. To conclude, a climate plan based on carbon pricing is the lowest cost approach to achieving Canada's GHG emissions targets. The legislation here ensures carbon pricing applies across Canada, addresses concerns around competitiveness, but also gives provinces flexibility in designing provincial carbon pricing and recycling revenue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Begin. Turning then to the Canadian Climate Action Network Canada, Mr. Marshall, Vice Chair of the Board. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and merci beaucoup de l'invitation aujourd'hui.
Thank you for your invitation today.
Program Manager for Environmental Defence, but I'm here representing Climate Action Network Canada as their Vice Chair of the Board. I'd like to make 3 points in support of the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act. First is that a polluter pays system is an important tool in the fight against climate change. Secondly, Canadians can afford to put into place ambitious and far-reaching climate policies, including a price on carbon. And third, Canadians can't afford to leave any tools in the toolbox when it comes to this massive risk and given the urgency of the issue. So first, a polluter pays system is an important tool in reducing emissions, giving incentives to for businesses and individuals to move towards clean energy, to move towards greater energy efficiency. It's been used in many places for many years. It's why 7 of the 10 largest economies in the world have some form of a price on carbon. China has often been used as the boogeyman of climate change. They have had a cap and trade system at the state level for many years, and now they're implementing a national cap and trade system. Design matters, though. The concessions that this bill gives to industry in terms of the output-based pricing system could make it less effective. And in the past, when carbon pricing systems have failed to be as effective as possible, it is because of larger than necessary concessions to industry. And that's what worries me, that Canada is doing the same thing here. There is a small portion of the Canadian economy that does face competitive concerns when you put into place a price on carbon, and yet this bill gives blanket concessions, blanket exemptions to the industrial sector. And that could be its undoing, quite frankly. Second, the Canadian economy can afford to have a price on carbon across Canada. 4 provinces already have it. The fact that those 4 provinces are leading the country in terms of economic growth does not mean that carbon pricing provokes economic growth, but it certainly shows that you can have both a strong, robust economy and a price on carbon. Scandinavian countries were the first to put into place these kinds of carbon pricing systems and have generally led the industrialized world in terms of economic growth. The modeling shows that the small differences you can have between doing absolutely nothing on climate change and having ambitious, robust climate policies is incredibly small and incredibly manageable. Recent research that Environmental Defence and some of our partners published from leading Canadian economists showed that the difference between reaching our Paris commitments by 2030 and doing nothing on climate change would be the difference between 38% growth in our GDP and 39% growth in our GDP between now and 2030. Third, Canadians can't afford to not use every single policy tool that we have in order to fight climate change. Canada's 2030 target has been deemed to be highly insufficient to avoid dangerous levels of climate change. And yet we're not on track to reach it. So proposed policies in the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change are incredibly important, and they should be implemented with the greatest urgency and rigor. And that includes carbon pricing across Canada. Leaving it off the table just leaves us further from doing the bare minimum to fight the biggest threat that we do face. The history of Canada over the last decade, maybe generation, is of increasingly understanding the perils of climate change and doing nothing about it. I certainly hope that the next decade isn't written by those who will favor polluters over the public good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marshall. Turning then to Équiterre, Mr. Ribot, Executive Director. The floor is yours.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup pour l'invitation.
Thank you very much for the invitation, ladies and gentlemen, members, chairman. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to represent Équiterre today, and I want to speak to Bill C-74, Division 5, dealing with pricing pollution caused by GHGs. Our organization is not for profit. It is a charity. It has charitable status. It has 22,000 members and 110,000 supporters. We have offices in Quebec, Montreal, and Ottawa. To fight tobacco, we have established and increased prices for that. And to fight acid rain that was destroying our forests, President George Bush put a price on sulfur through a cap and trade system. And so we must set a price for carbon to deal with this issue. Putting a price on carbon is an international commitment that was undertaken by Canada at the Paris Convention, and we have set our target to achieving the levels by 2030. The recent report from Environment and Climate Change Canada dealing with the sought-after results for carbon pricing indicates that 80 to 90 million tons by 2022 in Canada would be the number representing the reduction of GHGs. It's really quite enormous. But, you know, if nothing were done, it would be negligible. What's more, we still have an anticipated impact on growth. And we do want to have this gap of 64 megatons of GHGs dealt with by 2030. Putting a price on carbon pollution has become a standard worldwide. The World Bank has said that there are now 67 jurisdictions, including China, that are participating in this effort. Canada must act. Some are concerned about the potential disadvantages in terms of competitiveness for Canadian industry, but the federal system provides for other specific measures that would attenuate the risks for Canada. The new Clean Innovation Fund will meet the challenge for a clean economy that in terms of carbon. And the cap and trade system in Quebec, for dealing with the GHG emissions covers about 85% of the emissions in the province, and it is broadening its ties with California. The carbon market is a most useful, appropriate tool for Quebec to meet these needs in terms of GHG emission reduction. And to date, the carbon market has generated revenues of more than $2 billion, which are entirely being used to implement the action plan that Quebec has established for climate change. There is no party, no major political party is opposed to what is being done in Quebec in terms of our carbon exchange. The revenue from sales at the open carbon markets are paid into the Green Fund. Let me give you an example of what is being done. There is a company that is called Lyon that makes 100% electric school buses, and more recently they have been exporting them to California. One day all school buses in the world will be electric because of the work that's being done in Quebec through the Green Fund. But all of this it will not allow us to meet our targets. And so the governments in the provinces and the territories, as well as the federal government, have to work together to allow us to meet these targets through complementary regulatory systems that will deal with passenger cars, trucks, and whatnot that have held people hostage to the fluctuation in the price of gas at the pumps. What is important to retain here is this notion of complementarity in other measures to be undertaken in addition to pricing carbon. The debate surrounding this is not a new one. It goes back to the Kyoto Agreement in 1997 when there was a price that was established and it was in the document called Turning the Corridor under the Conservative government. The provinces also, some of them, set prices on carbon given the striking evidence of its need. I would point out that Canada, with its 2030 target, I'm sorry, I'm a bit lost here. I'm going to conclude by saying that it is very important for us that we pursue this goal of carbon pricing in Canada, and this is why we are here to support it in front of you today.
Mr. Rebeau. Turning to Mr. Saul with Executive Director of Nature Canada. Welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the Finance Committee, my name is Graham Saul. I'm the Executive Director of Nature Canada. First, I'd like to acknowledge that Budget 2018 represents a historic federal investment in nature conservation. Nature Canada is truly excited about the promise of expending the $1.3 billion prudently over 5 years to reverse decline in biodiversity in Canada and establish managing protected areas and recovering species at risk. So thank you to everyone that played a role in supporting those provisions. On the subject of the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Act, I think it's worth remembering that it was 26 years ago, in May 1992, that Canada signed the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It's been more than 25 years since Canada first promised to reduce its greenhouse gas pollution, and we've barely begun to follow through on that promise. And it was about 14 years ago that Liberal Prime Minister Paul Martin first announced plans to put a price on greenhouse gas pollution by creating a market for emission reductions in all sectors of the economy. And it never happened. And then in May 2008, almost exactly 10 years ago today, Conservative Federal Environment Minister John Baird called carbon trading, quote, a key part, unquote, of the government's new Turning the Corner plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Later on that year, also in 2008, the Conservative government of Stephen Harper won a minority mandate with a campaign that clearly pledged to develop and implement a cap-and-trade system for greenhouse gases and air pollution. And it never happened. And today, 2015, and then in 2015, Canadians supported a Liberal election platform that made a clear commitment to put a price on greenhouse gas pollution. And here we are today. So what are just a few of the things that have been happening in the meantime? The city of Calgary had 2 100-year floods in only 8 years. the most recent of which in 2013 resulted in $6 billion in financial losses and property damage. In 2016, 2 years ago this May, almost 90,000 people were evacuated from wildfires across Fort McMurray. Thousands of homes were reduced to ashes. According to the Insurance Bureau of Canada, the Fort McMurray wildfire became the costliest insured natural disaster in Canadian history, with an estimated $3.77 billion in claims filed by mid-November 2016. And on this day last year, I watched as the military were called in to help deal with the fact that my hometown of Ottawa-Gatineau was flooding. The flooding caused more than $220 million in insurable damage. A couple months later, I spent a few weeks in British Columbia as the worst recorded fire season in the history of the province unfolded. More than 1,300 fires burned more than 1.2 million hectares, displacing 65,000 people from their homes and costing BC over $500 million. The wildfire season included the longest state of emergency in the history of British Columbia, lasting a total of 10 weeks. And now, all we have to do is look east to the tragic situation unfolding in New Brunswick. As Premier Brian Gallant put it, quote, "We are seeing weather events like we have never seen before. This is most likely going to end up being the largest, most impactful flood that we have ever recorded here in New Brunswick," unquote. So I've been asked to comment on what I think about Part 5 of Bill C-74, which enacts the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act and makes the fuel charge regulations. I think this is a policy that we should have adopted at least 10 years ago today, I think we need to use all the tools in the toolbox, including carbon pricing, to finally move this country in the right direction. We need to stop fiddling while places like New Brunswick drown. We need to stop fiddling while places like British Columbia burn. Canadians have consistently voted for leaders that have promised to take action to fight climate change, and now we need to stop playing politics with what is quickly becoming a life and death issue for communities and species across Canada and around the world. We need to position Canada to be a leader in the economy of the 21st century, and putting a price on greenhouse gas pollution is part of that process. More importantly, we need to finally send a signal to our children and grandchildren that we are prepared to invest in solutions instead of turning our back on the problems and letting them deal with the resulting damage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saul. Given that everybody held their remarks fairly tight, we can go to our regular rounds of first four at 7 minutes apiece. Ms. O'Connell, you're first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Kenny, I'm going to start with you. In all of your years in the House of Commons, you never once acknowledged that climate change exists. So I have to ask, do you accept the science and acknowledge climate change is real and caused from human activity?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Great. I'm so glad you're there, finally, because you then tweeted about, you said that carbon dioxide is as natural as water and oxygen. Do you actually believe that oxygen is as harmful to the environment as carbon dioxide?
An extreme excess of any natural element can be injurious to human health, but I stand by that plainly scientific statement.
And do you actually think, you talked about Albertans being there and know that climate change is real and we have to get there, but you, being part of the Harper Conservatives, did nothing to actually put forward a plan to deal with climate change. So you're asking this committee to take you as a credible witness to talk about the economy, but as a minister under Stephen Harper, you failed our economy while not protecting the environment. So why should we believe in what you're saying now? Why should we not take action?
I reject the premise of the torqued question, Mr. Chair, and I would ask in response if the member and her government feel that this strongly, why don't they have the courage of their convictions and just to admit to Canadians that what they really want is a carbon tax of at least $300 a ton? Why don't they admit that this is just the frog in the pot? They're trying to get people used to the idea of punishing folks for simply driving to work and living normal lives. I can tell the member that my job is to represent the majority of Albertans, 2/3 of whom oppose carbon taxes and don't believe giving politicians more money is a solution to environmental challenges.
So then, Mr. Kenney, what's your plan in dealing with this? Are you expecting Canadians and farmers and municipalities to deal with climate change on their own? You have no plan to help municipalities deal with, we heard about 100-year storms happening more regularly. So what's your plan? Or should farmers just adapt to crop cycles being changed on a regular basis and storms and wildfires and the continuation of floods? Why would you suggest that you leave Canadians and Albertans out on their own to deal with climate change when we know the impacts are real? And why don't you acknowledge the cost of inaction, as was rightfully pointed out by Mr. Saul's testimony?
Well, there are several questions there, but Mr. Chair, I am standing in defense of farmers, for example, who are facing massive increases in the cost of doing their business as a result of this bill, of this proposed Liberal carbon tax. There are 49,000 farms in Alberta, and the current carbon tax in Alberta at $30 a ton will cost them upwards of $182 million a year. The federal government Department of Agriculture says that the national carbon tax will cost farmers $3,705 on average when implemented at $50 a ton. Perhaps Liberals think costing farmers an extra $4,000 a year is helping them. I happen to think it's hurting them.
Mr. Kenney, you come with the statistics on what you believe the costs will be, but we don't actually, until we implement the full plan and know how each province and territory are going to move forward with that implementation. But what you don't come here with is any information on what you're going to do for the cost of Canadians, or Albertans in your case, for the cost of inaction. How much do you think, what do you think Canadians are going to do, or municipalities are going to do, without partners in governments that are actually preparing and dealing with the mitigation that climate change and these effects will come forward with?
So, Mr. Chair, the estimate of this bill costing Canadian farmers $3,700 a year is not my belief. It is the estimate of the Department of Agriculture of the federal Liberal government in the memo that they published on January 17th of 2017. I'm only making reference to this government's estimate. And in terms of other cost to consumers, if I could just finish one sentence, if I could only
But why won't you answer the question?
Mr. Chairman.
So, O'Connell, Mr. Kenney has the floor.
I'm trying to be brief, Mr. Chair. If the member is concerned about a lack of estimates, then perhaps she could ask her own government to be forthcoming with Canadians and to stop hiding the real cost of the carbon tax. I understand the official opposition here has made several motions asking the government to release all relevant documents and estimates about the cost impact on Canadians of the carbon tax, and it's up to the government to be transparent about that, not the opposition in Alberta.
But Mr. Kenney, you're coming here as a witness. What's your plan? Why won't you answer the question about the inaction that you and the Harper Conservatives did to this country for so long, and you want to continue it? So what's your plan to deal with climate change then? What's your plan to meet the Paris targets? Because you come here and you don't actually offer any insight on what your plan or what you think Canada should do to deal with climate change. Inaction is not going to solve anything. The Harper Conservative plan did nothing, and it did not grow our economy. So what are you proposing should be the plan that Canada goes forward with to meet our Paris Agreement targets and grow the economy?
Well, just to correct the record, firstly, Mr. Chair, the previous federal government did have the best growth record in the G7 following the 2008 crisis. Secondly,
your own facts.
Secondly, Mr. Chair, with respect to a alternative plan on the environment in Alberta, we'll be releasing a comprehensive plan in our platform for the next year's election, but it might very well include a return to the specified gas emitter regulations, which imposes a cost on major emitters to support research and development, science and technology. I believe the solution will be found in thousands of technological advances as opposed to punishing as opposed to punishing consumers for simply living ordinary lives. But, Mr. Chair, I find this line of questioning peculiar. Because the member doesn't seem to acknowledge that there is no expert advice that a $50 carbon tax gets anywhere close to achieving Paris Climate Conference targets. According to Environment Canada, one last sentence. According to Environment Canada, the carbon tax would need to be $300 a ton by 2050 in order to achieve the same target. So I gather that's the member's position. I hope she'll run on that in the next election.
We'll have to end that first round discussion there. And maybe somebody can explain this to me. Maybe some of the other people are at the table as well. I understand that under the federal piece of legislation, farmers are exempt. And I believe there's a marked gas exemption in Alberta like there is in PEI. I'm just not sure. Can somebody explain to me what happens with the farm community? Because I've been saying they're exempt under this piece of legislation. Am I wrong?
Mr. Chair, if I may. So you're correct that under Division 2, Subdivision A, Clause 2, charges are not payable on farm-marked fuels, but that exemption would not cover other fuels used on the farm, principally natural gas used for heating reasons. So there's an exemption of your colored fuel, but not of the or purple gas, or however you want, but not of the natural gas or other fuels used on farm.
That's what we call it, purple gas at home. Mr. Poilievre, 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'll start with Mr. Kenny. Mr. Kenny, you were part of a government that, in addition to presiding over a reduction in greenhouse gases, also reduced the tax burden on Canadians and had the strongest economic growth in the G7, all simultaneously. Do you believe it's possible to have a reduced tax burden at the same time as making progress on protecting the environment?
Yes, absolutely, and that's, I think, the emerging consensus globally. This is why the Liberal government in Australia repealed the carbon tax. I would point out the Labour Party, which initially introduced that, has also given up on the carbon tax because they realize that it's all economic pain and no environmental gain. The voters in the greenest state in the U.S., Washington State, reflected that in a recent referendum, as did the last French socialist government in deciding not to proceed with increases in a national carbon tax. So I can only speak for what polls suggest are the vast majority of Albertans who believe that punishing people for simply consuming energy in a cold northern climate is not an effective climate or environmental strategy. And their emphasis right now, with 156,000 unemployed people, is to get our economy moving again, partly through reducing the tax burden rather than increasing it.
And it has increased at a federal level. 80% of middle-class taxpayers are paying higher income taxes today than when this government took office, on average $800 more. That number is expected to rise to 92% of middle-class taxpayers paying roughly $2,000 more, according to calculations by the Fraser Institute. And now none of those calculations actually include the burden of the carbon tax. Speaking of the tax burden, Mr. Béguin, you said that the damage the carbon tax will do to the economy can be mitigated if the revenues are used to reduce corporate and income taxes. Recently, we learned that British Columbia is now collecting more in carbon taxes than it has reduced in income and corporate taxes. Can you tell me of another Canadian jurisdiction then that has offset the carbon tax revenues with an equal or larger number of income tax and corporate tax reductions?
There are no examples so far. That being said, the previously proposed Ontario plan before the change in leadership would have included a fully revenue-neutral carbon pricing policy with revenue used to reduce taxes. The Manitoba plan is also exploring that possibility.
Right. So,
your time there, Pierre, but if anybody else wants to respond on some of these questions, raise your hand and I will catch you as well. I forgot to mention that in the beginning. Pierre, you're on. I'm not taking from your time.
and this is our principal preoccupation as Conservatives. We believe in reducing the tax burden, but that never seems to happen. You know, British Columbia was supposed to have been the example of where the government would offset higher carbon taxes by lowering income and business taxes. Now the government is winning and taxpayers are losing in that province. In Ontario, not only is the government collecting vastly more through its cap-and-trade tax system than it's giving back in tax relief. In fact, it's not giving any tax relief. The money is being spent on programs that disproportionately help privileged and wealthy insiders. You can, if you're a working class single mother in Ontario, your heating bills, your gasoline bills go up. But if you're a multimillionaire who can afford to buy an electric Tesla, then the provincial Liberal government has got just the rebate for you, a $15,000 rebate. So it is definitely a wealth transfer from working class people to the super wealthy. That doesn't even take into consideration all the corporate welfare programs that are typically funded under the guise of green handouts to business, all of which also take from the working class and give to the privileged few. And as you just pointed out through your answer, there isn't a single jurisdiction in all of Canada that has returned the revenues from the carbon tax to income and business taxpayers. Mr. Kenney, do you worry about the impact that these taxes will have on low-income families?
Yes, absolutely. People who are the most vulnerable, and of course the proponents of carbon taxes say that's offset by rebates. These are not. One of the problems with carbon taxes, unlike other forms of consumption taxes, that the cost of them cascade down through the economy and hit average people the hardest. What's effectively happened in Alberta is they've taken, in part, a tax that was on the major oil companies that produce emissions and now impose it on ordinary people through the carbon tax. Mr. Begin actually said that was a feature. I think it's a bug. He actually said, he pointed out that global multinational oil companies like the NDP carbon tax because they don't have to pay for their own emissions. The consumer does. It gets pushed down through the economy. And so, Mr. Chairman, I think that I was surprised to see parties of the left now supporting a regressive form of taxation which imposes a disproportionately large burden on lower income people.
And on that, well, my question was directed at Mr. Kenney. Is this going to come off my time?
I usually will save your time. Mr. Leach.
Yes, I'd be very interested to see any evidence that suggests that the Alberta policy imposes a large burden on lower income individuals. Statistics Canada certainly disagrees with that. If you look at the 2017 data, it showed that over 40% of Albertans were made better off, the bottom 40% by income, were made on average better off by the combination of the carbon tax and rebates, including the indirect effects that Mr. Kenney mentions. And then if you look at the 2018 data, before any adjustments to the credit that I'd like to see forthcoming, you're still looking at about 35% of Albertans, the lowest 35% of Albertan households by income, who are made better off. And that's Statistics Canada's data, their SPSM model. That's not just something that's made up. You know, you're entitled to an opinion, but not evidence, your own evidence.
I don't want to get into a debate in the left-hand corner of the, yes, Jason, go ahead.
I would invite Professor Leach to join with me on I'll take him out on the road for a day or so. We could visit some charities and nonprofits that are barely hanging together, and on which this is imposing massive additional costs. Perhaps he'd like to be part of the fundraiser that the Sundre Senior Centre is now having to hold amongst low-income seniors to pay the growing carbon tax bill, for which they get no offset, no credit. there are huge gaps in how this addresses the cost burden on low-income people.
Okay, Mr. Poilievre, last question.
Mr. Kenney, your province has seen a reduction in investment as a result of numerous policies, but I suspect this carbon tax has not assisted. When large multinational oil companies leave Alberta and invest and produce in other jurisdictions around the world, does that reduce the overall global emissions of greenhouse gases? And have you seen examples of this happen in the last couple of years?
We estimate that in the last 2 years, some nearly $40 billion of capital has been reallocated from Alberta's oil and gas sector to the same sector in other jurisdictions that do not have carbon taxes, jurisdictions like Colorado, North Dakota, West Texas, Kazakhstan, Iran, and other oil and gas producers around the world. I would further point out that the carbon tax was sold to Albertans as something that would produce so-called social license, that it would move the opponents of pipelines and our energy industry to becoming proponents and supporters. I have not been able to identify, and nor has the NDP government been able to identify, a single government, political party, environmental organization, or other major stakeholder that's moved from opposition to support for pipelines as a result of punishing Albertans for heating their homes in the winter.
We'll have to end it there, Mr. Kenney. Mr. Duceau, 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all of the witnesses for being here today. My first question, and I'm also going to start with the Honourable Mr. Kenney. Thank you for being here. Many people, particularly Conservatives, have told us or promised us that there'll be an economic apocalypse if we decide to adopt a carbon charge, as we are being asked to do with this bill, C-74. So can you tell us, through any statistics or can you tell us, rather, any administration where there might have been a completely negative impact on the economy to demonstrate the argument that you're trying to make? Absolutely. I would point out Australia as such a jurisdiction. That's the reason why the Liberal government of Australia withdrew the carbon tax. And that's the reason why the Labour Party in Australia supported this decision. There is a great feeling in Australia that this did not work in order to reach the environmental objectives, and that it has harmed the economy of the country. So there's economic data that shows a cause and effect, the effect of the price of carbon dragging things downwards. Yes. And I think that if Albertans believe that a carbon price would help economic growth, I imagine that the majority would have supported such a tax. But given the fact that we are continually seeing 2/3 of Albertans actively opposing carbon is the fact. My next question is for you. You, in the last statements you made, you're making a cause and effect link between the price of carbon and the increases the needs for food banks and community organizations, needs in terms of social assistance. Do you have any data that can really make that cause and effect link between an increase in carbon pricing and the needs of those groups? Well, yes, and it's just common sense, because the rates for heating their homes and buildings, their facilities, is going up with the carbon tax. It's very difficult for organizations, and small organizations that are nonprofits, for charities, for schools even. The School Board of Calgary is currently cutting $1 million of their programs for daycares by $1 million. And the rate for the carbon tax for that school board is $1 million a year. So it's clear to the school board and nonprofit organizations that they are under pressure from rising costs because of the carbon tax in Alberta.
On any of these points to agree or supplement, that's fine. Mr. Dussault.
Now I'd like to not change the subject, but move to perhaps to Mr. Leach. You are from Alberta. There was reference made to the issue of discounts that are offered, and that's a policy in Alberta. Could you elaborate on that and perhaps give us some figures? What does this represent? The government of Alberta, here in Canada, for example, at the federal level, we have a similar system. So if we were to take the Alberta model, what would that look like? What sort of revenues are you pulling in from a carbon tax, and what investments are made in the economy directly through consumers or others? Thank you very much for the question. What I have in front of me is impacts on individuals and families. And what we see in Alberta, for example, which includes 10% of families earning a lower income per year. We see the impact being $218 a year per year. That's Statistics Canada information, with a rebate of $294 per year. And this concerns the families with the greatest need. So with the Alberta program, the neediest families will get $76 a year. So those figures don't include measures that are funded through the carbon tax. So I don't have the aggregate data with me at the moment.
How revenue recycling can address these issues for low-income households, and found that using around 10 to 13% of the revenue generated from a carbon price would be sufficient to make the bottom 40% of households in terms of incomes as well off as if the carbon price had not been in place. That leaves sufficient revenue for all kinds of other options, including, for example, reducing other taxes, and does point again to one of the advantages of the Pan-Canadian framework that gives provinces the flexibility to use revenue as they choose, whether it is to address these concerns or to remove other distortionary taxes or to drive other benefits as they see fit.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it seems to me that I have two different versions here. Hearing that the neediest families, the lowest income families in Alberta at the end of the year, on average, have more money in their pockets at the end of the year. But on the other hand, we're being told that the social needs are constantly on the increase, and that this is getting worse with the carbon charge. So I am having trouble understanding which is true out of all of that, to see if the impact really is negative on people who are the most disadvantaged. So if anyone else has other statistics that could enlighten us in this debate, I'd be happy to hear it. Well, I might say that indeed there are several programs that are in place to mitigate the impact of this carbon charge on people who have low income. The most disadvantaged, you have to understand, use very little energy. So at the outset, people who have the lowest incomes don't have vehicles in Canada. So first of all, you have to say that. And second, it's really in terms of housing for the most part that you have to intervene, so very targeted programs can be set up. And in other cases, there are administrations that have decided to provide rebates, so that's how they put money back into the pockets of the people who have the lowest income. So there are several mechanisms that have been used here in Canada and in other jurisdictions to ensure that the impact is mitigated on the lowest income families. And over the midterm, it's improved when we manage to transfer costly energy to lower cost to help people with their housing.
Doubtless, Mr. Leach, we all have the figures.
I believe climate change is popular delusion and a media conspiracy?
Nope.
So then why did you hire a campaign manager that said exactly that climate change is nothing more than a media conspiracy?
I've never actually hired a campaign manager. I've had, we had volunteers working in my leadership campaign, and I don't know everything all of them have ever said in the past.
So you definitely don't agree that climate change is media conspiracy or hysteria?
I definitely already answered that question with a clear no.
Well, then why did you also say things like that there's a legitimate range of perspectives around the role of humans in climate change? Are you saying that there's merit to the argument or the question about human activity that is the cause for climate change?
No.
No, you don't. Then why do you say these things? Do you say these things just for political attention? Why do you say them if you don't think that they're true? How do I know what you're saying here today is true if you say one thing and deny it later?
Well, Mr. Chair, the member quoted me and then asked a different question. I stand by what I said, that there is a debate about the precise degree to which there are anthropogenic causes behind climate change, but I agree with the scientific consensus that there are significant, very significant anthropogenic causes of climate change. I've already addressed that clearly.
I have to tell you, I'm really happy to hear you say that here today, except you keep contradicting yourself on Twitter or at speeches to your base. You've also said there's no connection between large-scale weather events and broader climate change issues. So do you think there's a link or not?
Mr. Chair, on these questions generally I defer to expert opinion.
Then why are you speaking about them in public in this manner? Should we believe you now or believe the Jason Kenney of Twitter?
Mr. Chair, I've been always consistent. I accept the broad scientific consensus on these environmental questions, and which consensus says, the economic consensus is, that if you want to achieve Paris climate targets, you need a carbon tax of at least $300 a ton. Canadians don't support...
agree with a price on pollution.
Ms. O'Connell, Mr. Kenney has the floor.
I am trying to be very brief in my answers, Mr. Chair.
So brief that there's no answer.
O'Connell, he has the floor. Go
I'm offering very direct yes and no answers instead of trying to rag the puck. Mr. Chairman, the question that what I'm trying to articulate here is that I agree with the majority of Canadians that punishing people for simply living normal lives, for driving to work, filling up their gas tanks and heating their homes, running their small businesses and non-profits, is not justifiable. It is not an effective environmental strategy. I wish that the proponents of these taxes around this table and on the government side were honest and forthcoming and actually had the courage of their convictions and admitted that what they want is a carbon tax that is in the range of $300 a ton, which would have a massive effect on people's disposable incomes and cost of living.
Wants in.
Is this taking from my time?
No, like everyone else, I'll give you the time.
All right, so we published a report that showed that Canada could reach its climate commitments. It would require a number of different policies, including a rising carbon price, that would reach somewhere in the neighborhood of $90 a ton by 2030, but also involved other policies, of course. So we came clean with it by publishing it, and of course we are going to have to continue to implement policies with the greatest rigor and with the greatest urgency in order to reduce emissions. And that is the study that I cited before that showed that the Canadian economy would grow by at least 38% between now and 2030 with those policies in place.
Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you. Mr. Kenney, your MLA, Angela Pitt, wrote in an email, quote, "Climate changes all the time. CO2 has very little impact on temperature changes. The science has changed on this topic many times," end quote. Now, Mr. Kenney, you're here and you're acknowledging climate change is real, which I'm very pleased to hear you say. But when the voices that make up your party are indifferent to and denial to science, how can Canadians expect that you're a credible voice to grow the economy and protect the environment?
Well, Mr. Chair, that'll be up to Alberta voters to decide about a year from now. In terms of being a credible voice, according to current polls, the party that I represent has about a 35-point lead of voter intention in Alberta. In part because the member's asking a political question about our political credibility. I'm offering a political answer, which is that consistently majority of Albertans support the party which I lead in public opinion polls. We'll see if that holds through to the next election. And we do not see a concomitant support for the carbon taxes that the member is trying to impose on Canadians with this bill.
Mr. Chair, at the end of the day, the credibility I'm questioning is Mr. Kenney's. He says one thing on Twitter, he says another thing to his base at conventions, and then he comes to this committee and says something, he denies basically the very comments that he made. So I think that this committee has to take this very seriously in the sense of Mr. Kenney is alone on this panel, and alike many Conservatives, when it comes to pricing pollution. So I don't think we can trust, after the last 10 years, the Conservative government or Conservatives with growing the economy and protecting the environment. They have no plan. Harper's Conservatives had no plan. Mr. Kenney has no plan. He says he'll release it later, but then why come here and not provide the details? They on their sorry, this is my 7 minutes, and so the Conservatives continue with their denial of science, denial of the facts. They like to make up their own facts, but have no plan. And I think, since Mr. Poilievre talks so much about this, I think if you had a plan, you'd provide it. But it's going to be the same old Conservatives under Stephen Harper, which is to do nothing to grow the economy and not protect the environment and leave Canadians on their own to deal with the damage. I think the real cover-up here, Mr. Chair, is the Conservatives' climate plan cover-up. And I would love for them to stand by their convictions and come forward with an actual idea. That's the cover-up. Just be honest with Canadians. Tell them you have no plan.
We'll have to end it there and give Mr. Kenney the opportunity to, you know how this place works, we'll have to give you the opportunity to respond. And
thank you, Chair.
We'll go to Mr. Kelly. Go ahead, yes?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Ms. O'Connell has a firm grasp of the obvious in identifying myself as being alone on this panel in opposing carbon taxes. Happily, I'm not alone amongst Albertans, 2/3 of whom oppose carbon taxes. And I would invite anybody who believes that Canadians buy the notion that punishing consumers is a good economic or environmental strategy. I invite them to put that proposition to voters on the ballot. We'll be doing that next year in Alberta, and I'm very confident in the result.
Thank you both, or thank you all. Mr. Kelly, we're down to 5-minute rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we've witnessed something extraordinary at this committee. We saw difficult questions put to a witness who is a parliamentarian, and the parliamentarian actually answered them. So that's he was asked a series of yes/no questions that he answered. He provided an answer to every one of Ms. O'Connell's questions. So if I contrast that with what happened here, for example, last Thursday, where the Minister of Finance was at the table and asked repeatedly by Mr. Poilievre about supplying evidence that had been redacted resulting from an access to information request, asked repeatedly to end the cover-up, and asked repeatedly, what will the cost to ordinary families be for this federally imposed carbon tax? And we did not get any answers, not even an attempt at an answer. So I applaud Mr. Kenney for actually answering questions at committee. We don't see that very often here. Could you, my question to Mr. Kenney is, in your campaigning, and you've spent the last 2 years campaigning, and it's extraordinary what you've accomplished through uniting the Conservative movement and winning the leadership of that new party, and then winning a by-election. During all of your interaction with regular Albertans, Can you relay to this committee some of the feedback that you heard from ordinary Albertans and what they think of the policies of this federal government, specifically the carbon tax?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would characterize, I've done nearly 1,000 events, meeting tens of thousands of people in every walk of life and background across my province in the past 20 months. And what I have found is overwhelming and passionate opposition to the carbon tax, but also the hostility to our energy industry, which of course has not only been a key engine of Canada's prosperity in recent decades, Canada's most important export product, but also hugely important to Alberta's economy, and through that, a key element in Canada's in the Federation. Albertans contribute through their federal taxes a net of about $20 billion a year to fiscal federalism. Much of that fiscal capacity generated by the energy sector, and so Albertans don't understand the approach of bottlenecking our resources and punishing people for living ordinary lives through policies like the carbon tax. And this has real effects on people's lives, which, is why consistently 2/3 of Albertans have indicated opposition to the NDP carbon tax in our province. And that's before, the Eco-Fiscal Commission, Mr. Béguin's organization, said in April of in a recent report that a rising carbon price is so important that a carbon price of $100 per ton won't force actions that cost $200 or even thousands of dollars per ton. I understand Professor Leach, you could correct me if I'm wrong, has said that what you need is a $200 more or less ton carbon price, an expensive retrofit strategy, and a lot of other strategies. The Laurier Centre for Economic Research has said significant hike needed to achieve emissions targets. A 10% reduction in emissions over 7 years would require a $175 a ton levy. The Department of Finance said on February 24th of 2017 that the overall approach is to be reviewed by 2022 to confirm the path forward, including continued increases in stringency, meaning the tax rate in future years. Environment Canada's March 30, 2017 memo said the carbon tax would need to be $300 in 2050.
Have to cut it there, or Mr. Kelly's not going to get into the second question, and Mr. Béguin wants in as well. Go ahead, Mr. Kelly.
I would quickly ask you if you've heard from municipal leaders who have pointed out the budgetary constraint that the carbon tax puts onto their operations, heating buildings, running buses, running police cars, all of the things that municipalities have to do.
Both the Alberta Union of Municipalities and the Alberta Association of Municipal Districts and Counties have passed resolutions opposing the current government's policy.
And Mr. Béguin.
Just because Mr. McKenney raised our report, I wanted to clarify the point of a carbon price is to avoid regulations that impose those higher implicit carbon prices, implicit carbon costs. Those high costs that Mr. Kenney alluded to would be potentially imposed by regulatory policies, by non-pricing policies that could be used instead of carbon pricing. The point of carbon pricing is to focus on low-cost emissions reductions, thus avoiding high-cost ones.
Mr. Fergus.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'd like to welcome all the witnesses who are with us today. I appreciate your comments, and I thank you for them, some more than others, but that's quite normal, isn't it?
There are costs to doing things, but there are also certainly costs to not doing things. Doing nothing is rarely free. From your perspective, in regards to putting on a price on carbon, which is more expensive to the people of Alberta, putting a price on carbon or not?
I think it's a tough question to answer with hard evidence. And the reason I say that is because part and parcel of acting on climate change when you're an economy like Alberta, which is exposed to the global investment climate, which is exposed to the global market, is on the one hand making sure that you maintain our competitiveness, on the other hand making sure that we maintain access to capital. And I direct you to comments perhaps by Mark Carney at the Bank of England as a primary example of this. Mark Carney has stated that companies and lenders and insurers and all of this area of finance, which is just so important to an open economy like Alberta's, have become much more concerned with the question of climate change. And as other members in this panel will certainly know, we've fought in Alberta against misinformation, campaigns against our industry, et cetera. And a lot of those campaigns were rooted in a perception that Alberta's economy was incompatible with action on climate change. And so being able to step forward and say, not, no, we can't act on climate change because of our industry, we were able to step forward and say, our industry can act on climate change, why can't yours? And to put that challenge forward to the world. And we're seeing that now play out, obviously with some roadblocks and speed bumps, but I think that was something you can't necessarily go back in hindsight and say what would have happened without action, but I think action was imperative for Alberta.
On that front then, Professor Leach, globally for Alberta, for Canada, frankly, because Alberta's success will be Canada's success, is how significant is this opportunity of clean growth, clean technology, and clean innovation that would result from putting a price on carbon?
I mean, I think part of the idea of the price on carbon is enabling entrepreneurship, and this is a story we see, every day in Alberta. I have students in my classes every single year whose family success story is related to something you'd never read about in the news. It's figuring out a better valve, it's figuring out a better coiled tubing solution, it's figuring out some technical solution in our oil and gas sector, our electricity sector, or our technology sector that creates an opportunity for them. And what carbon pricing does, instead of a large government deciding, I know what's best for this refinery, for this oil sands operation, et cetera, it puts out the market for these clean technical solutions and says, you figure it out. And if you do, there's a giant market here for you to do that. So rather than having it be a big government solution, it's a small market solution.
So again, following your testimony just now, and this is relating back to testimony that we've heard from other witnesses, some will say that British Columbia's price on pollution has not reduced emissions at all. And I know you've researched this question along with other academic experts and environmental economists. What does the evidence say about the performance of BC's price on pollution?
I think my Eco-Fiscal Commission colleague highlighted that in his opening, but the evidence suggests that BC's emissions would be 5 to 15% higher right now than they are had it not been for the imposition of the carbon tax and the associated revenue recycling policies. So, BC's benefited from economic growth partly because of its low tax environment. Some of that has offset the aggregate emissions gains that would have come from simply imposing a carbon tax and doing nothing with the dollars, but that's a good thing. That's what we want. We want economic growth. But the emissions are lower than they otherwise would have been by a significant margin.
J'ai une question pour Monsieur Ribault.
I have a question for Mr. Ribault. We know that Quebec has decided to participate in the carbon market, the carbon exchange. What do you think that Quebec's entry means? What import does that have for the Quebec economy and for Canada in general, according to the research you've done? Well, listen, what we can say is that Quebec's economy is in very good shape, better than probably ever before in the past. If you look at the economic indicators, the employment rate and so on, I don't think that the carbon exchange has had a negative effect on the economy. It's positive. Quebec is facing a challenge that is broader in a sense because there is no simple, easy answer, if you like, in Quebec because electricity is totally decarbonized. And so the parts that you have to deal with to attack GHGs would be then transport and other industries. And they've all done more than their share over the years to reduce GHG pollution. So it's been very positive overall. And we've got a very...
Thank you all. Turning to Mr. Kamish.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So almost half the questions here could have been easily answered if the government would stop covering up the true cost of the carbon tax to low-income Canadians. Affordability is the #1 thing I always hear about, and affordability is a great question when it comes to any form of taxation, but especially the carbon tax, because it punishes those at the lowest income scale. You know, it's a tax on everything, and I know that Mr. Kenney and others on the Conservative side all across the country have used this terminology. You know, it's a tax on the essentials of living, and that's what it is. So the government keeps talking about people need to make better choices. Well, I have an arena in my riding in Erin Woods, and when the carbon tax was introduced provincially, it punished them, and it punished the families who used the arena through higher fees, higher costs when it came to just going out and having a day of hockey for the kids. So that's the issue. And if they would stop covering up, we'd actually be able to have a fulsome debate on it and actually be able to understand the true impact it will have on every single Canadian, on their affordability for everyday activities, heating your home, but also just going out for a game of hockey. You know, the euphemism that's often used is this tax on everything, making better choices, but they're trying to change the behavior of people. They don't like what people want to do. Go play hockey, heat your home to a temperature that you like. That's what I hear in my riding. But Mr. Kenney, again, my questions are going to go to you. This concept of forcing the actions of people, forcing people to do what the government wants them to do. Obviously, you disagree with it. And obviously, you've heard lots of stories from Albertans all across the province. So can you share those with this committee?
Well, yes, Mr. Chair, the attitude described by Mr. Kmiec was perfectly reflected by Alberta's Premier, who, in defending her carbon tax, said that it will cause people to, quotes, people should, quotes, make better choices, such as taking the bus. Well, there are millions of Albertans who don't live where there's any regular transit service, where taking the bus is not an option, where they living normal lives, taking their kids to those hockey practices and picking up the groceries and getting to work requires driving, and it often requires in many walks of life driving a larger vehicle as well. And so what our Premier essentially told those people is that they should stop living their normal lives. This is a moral judgment, really, on people who are not irresponsible. It punishes them, telling them that they have to turn the heat down at home when it's 30 below outside. I think within that is a desire for government to control people's lives. And I think there's a fundamental philosophical difference here. I believe in empowering people to be more free, not empowering government to make people less free.
So to my second question now, the cover-up, the redacted memo that they won't reveal all the information in it is actually twofold, because in this bill also is the rebate program, and the Alberta government already runs a rebate program. And I've been trying to get for a very long time more information from the Canada Revenue Agency, which runs the rebate program, the full information on how much rebates are paid, to whom are they paid, and how many non-residents of Alberta are getting this rebate. It's the Alberta Climate Leadership Adjustment Rebate. It's order paper question Q834. And every single time I've asked for information, I have not received it. They've claimed that it would be injurious to their relationships with the Alberta government. So, Mr. Kenney, after you win in 2019, that's my hope and the hope of many of my constituents, but will you commit to also releasing and backdating all that information on how the rebate actually worked in the province, and not doing what they've done, which is covering up all information from the rebate down to the redacted memo that they refused to release?
Yes, I absolutely will. Thank you for the suggestion.
And Mr. Saul wanted in here as well earlier.
I think there is a fundamental philosophical difference here. I think that's a fair point. I mean, what do we really know? We know that those countries around the world that are doing the most around this issue, countries like Germany and Norway, are doing perfectly well economically. So the sky doesn't fall. In fact, there's evidence that you can perform very successfully economically if you take this problem seriously. We also know that countries in Canada, like Quebec and British Columbia, that are trying to move forward, are doing perfectly well economically, and are taking steps to make sure, and in many ways protect the least advantaged people in their provinces in ways that many other provinces aren't. So we also know, though, that we have a serious problem on our hands. if you actually believe in the science, and I think this is where the fundamental philosophical difference comes in. If you actually believe in the science, then you have to draw the conclusion that it would be reckless and irresponsible to continue on the trajectory that we are on today, that it would fundamentally undermine the well-being of our children, and that it would cause potentially unprecedented harm to our economy and to future generations, not to mention the fact that the least responsible, the poorest people in the world, those least responsible for the problem, are the ones who will suffer first and worst if we fail to take action. So the fundamental philosophical difference that we have is, do you actually care about that problem? Do you actually care about what the science of climate change is telling us are the implications of doing nothing? And if you do, then the secret is very clear. When we look at what jurisdictions that are actually making progress on this issue, what do they have in common? They are trying. The jurisdictions around the world that care about this problem and are doing something about it and are actually making progress on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and ushering in the clean energy economy of the 21st century, what they ultimately have in common is they are trying. And so if, in fact, everyone around this table does truly care about this problem, if, in fact, we do not suffer a philosophical divide on that question, then what every party around the table has a responsibility to come forward with a plan that reflects the fact that they truly want to try to address it. And in absence of that plan, it's very difficult to come to the conclusion that we do, in fact, share a concern about this problem.
We'll have to thank you for those comments, Mr. Saul. We'll have to leave it there. We can run into the second panel's time a little because there's less witnesses on the second panel. Mr. Sabera, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome everyone. Been a very informative and spirited conversation this afternoon. A couple of things, because I keep hearing about the economy, and I know the residents of my riding, the economy is the most important thing, ensuring people have a good future and a bright future for their children. And as someone that's followed the economy for over 20 years of his life, and Mr. Leach, I've read a lot of your material, along with my alma mater, Professor Marc Jacquard over at Simon Fraser University, read his materials, and I think about where our Canadian economy is, with 85% of the provinces now operating under a pricing of carbon or some sort of mechanism. And we're doing quite well, and this was affirmed last week. A.T. Kearney came out, and Canada is the #2 place in the world for preference of foreign direct investments. Mr. Kinney, I visited the beautiful province of Alberta. I am originally from the West Coast, and I visited the Alberta Industrial Heartland, and seeing the number of investment decisions that have been made in the polypropylene and propylene businesses that IPL has announced, and so forth, and the number of opportunities there. And that is just phenomenal activity that's going on in that area of Alberta. And I was, covered the oil and gas sector. I'm not asking a question yet. I'll get there in a second. But to Mr. Leach, the question I have, if you look at the empirical evidence and you look at where industry is going, look at Daimler. In Germany, where they're switching their entire fleet of rigs or trucks, the ones you see on Alberta highways along with Ontario highways, to electric. They understand. Mr. Kinney alluded to ragging the puck. I like to look at the analogy of knowing where the puck's going and making sure you're there. That's the analogy I use. So to Mr. Leach, innovation, yes, but we need a mechanism for pricing carbon to get at the root of the issue.
Agreed. I guess if you have a couple of Albertans at the table, you need a Gretzky reference. I think I can just say over and over, if you want a program which does things which we've talked about today, does not necessarily materially increase the size or role of government and rewards entrepreneurship, you really have a couple of choices here. One is putting government funding towards direct funding of innovation. The other is create a market for those innovations and let our entrepreneurs take care of it. And the economic evidence comes back over and over and over again that carbon pricing creates more incentives for innovation than other policies at our disposal.
Exactly. And look, I'm an economist by training, and all I care about is whether Canadians are working or not and if they're doing well. And what I know today is unemployment rate is at a 40-year low. We've created nearly 600,000 new jobs. We're introducing the Canada's Working Benefit, and we ran on the platform where we were going to put a price on carbon nationally. But the beautiful thing about that is that each province can decide to do what with those revenues. I am in favor of a revenue-neutral putting a price on carbon. Absolutely. BC has adopted it for a very long time, and they've done phenomenally well. Now, I understand the difference between correlation and causation. I get that. But at the same time, and I do want to hear this, BC emissions are, if you want to say bend the curve, have been bent with the introduction of a price on carbon. If you can refer to that, please.
Sure. And, you know, I think you come back to the question of revenue neutrality, or how I prefer to think about it is just, are we increasing or changing the overall size of government? And there's really one policy that's on the table that would allow you to both implement strong incentives for green innovation and keep the size of government the same or smaller, which is to implement a carbon price that you then refund through whether it's credits or lower taxes. And that's certainly a policy option that's on the table. If the alternative is large government-funded subsidies, regulatory initiatives, et cetera, those are increasing the size and the role of government in solving this problem.
I'll go to Mr. Kinney. Mr. Kinney,
well, if I just jump in real quick on that. The theory is great. The reality is something completely different. The NDP government in Alberta has announced that as it increases its carbon tax from $30 to $50 a ton to comply with this bill, that there will be no incremental increase in rebates. So the supposed progressivity, there will be no offsetting tax cuts. There have been no reductions in regulations. So the theory that you hear, there will always be rebates, there will always be proportionate tax cuts, there will always be a reduction in regulations, is the opposite is happening in the real world of Alberta today.
Actually, if we want to talk about practice versus theory, you brought up the specified gas emitters, which is a carbon price on large emitters where the funds are not revenue neutral. They go to a fund, they went to a government-sponsored fund, very similar in design to the Turning the Corner plan that was proposed during your time in government, one of the many carbon pricing systems that were proposed during that time. And that's something which does not offset other taxes. It does not reduce the size of government. In fact, it puts a quasi-governmental organization in the role of allocating funding to whichever winners it chooses.
Appreciate Professor Leach defending multinational oil companies. I wish he was as passionate defending low-income Albertans who are now going to have to pay the carbon tax without a rebate, the rebate he recommended.
Not true at all.
Mr. Cervera, last question. We've got a debate in the corner again.
Gentlemen, if I can have your attention,
Mr.
please.
Kenny.
If I can have your attention, please. I love the spirited debate, and that's a great Canadian thing. To the eco-fiscal position, and I apologize to the rest of the panel, to the Eco-Fiscal Commission, yourself, and I've spoken many times with Mr. Reagan about this. The mechanism in place, to get to our Paris targets is multifaceted. It's just not one thing, and it's just not one thing. And a lot of it's going to happen through innovation. A lot of it is going to happen through new technologies that are going to come into play. I reference what Daimler and VW are doing over in Germany with their automobiles in adopting electric vehicles. Is that not correct? Is not that where the puck is going, where we should see the puck going?
Yeah, I think that there's clear benefits to putting in policy now rather than waiting. The longer you wait, the more expensive it's going to be to drive these changes. As to the specifics of exactly where the market is going, the great advantage of carbon pricing, you don't need to know for sure. You can set the market, get the market right, and set the prices right, and let the market respond. Let businesses identify where they see opportunities. Let businesses choose where they want to develop new technologies and new processes that can reduce more emissions at lower cost. That's how carbon pricing works.
Exactly, and we want to keep the environment attractive for business to invest, and we're number 2 in the world, just slightly behind the United States.
All in, all out. Thank you all. I just want to make one comment as I sit here and listen to this debate, and I think we've had a really good discussion. But if Canada's going to be left out of being part of the solution if we don't address the climate change issue. But I would say to all those folks who demonstrate against our pipelines and the ability to get our resources to market, that's not a solution either. I think for provinces such as Alberta and others to come on side, they have to see that the people in the environmental community are on side in allowing us to deal with climate change, but we also to get our product to market. I just wonder sometimes in this country, we're a country with natural resources like no other, and yet we can't find a way of getting our product to market, and we can do it in a way of lowering greenhouse gases. So all I'm saying, and I know the difficulty, Jason, as you do, of federal provincial issues, but this country has more opportunity than any other in the world in terms of our natural resources, the size of our country, and everything else. And we've got to find a solution that balances climate change against the ability to get our resources to the market and do the right thing for our kids and our grandchildren. That's where I'm coming from. So thank you all for the discussion. I think it was a lively discussion, but I just want to end by saying we got to find a way of bringing sides together here and getting to a solution. So with that, we'll suspend for 2 minutes and bring up the second panel. reconvene, and as I think everyone knows, we're dealing with Bill C-74, the Budget Implementation Act, on the February 27th, 2018 budget. And say welcome to the witnesses here this afternoon. We'll start with Green Budget Coalition, and I'm not sure, Andrew, whether I have Van Itterson right as the name or not.
Iderson.
Iderson, okay.
Close to the most.
We had a little debate about that up here. So, Mr. Van Iderson, welcome.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, honorable committee members, I would like to thank you all for inviting the Green Budget Coalition to speak to you today. The Green Budget Coalition, active since 1999, is unique, really, in bringing together the expertise of 20 of Canada's leading environmental organizations, including many groups you would know well: Ducks Unlimited, the Nature Conservancy of Canada, CPAWS, Nature Canada, which collectively represent over 600,000 urban and rural Canadians from coast to coast. The Green Budget Coalition's mission is to present an analysis of the most pressing issues regarding environmental sustainability in Canada and to make a consolidated annual set of recommendations to the federal government regarding strategic fiscal and budgetary opportunities. We work on a wide range of issues, including climate change, energy, nature conservation, freshwater, First Nations health, and water and wastewater issues. Today, I would like to address 2 points. I'd like to discuss carbon pricing, of course, and then also talk about some important progress in Budget 2018. And really echoing messages that were in our recommendations for Budget 2018, which we sent to you all last year and discussed with the senior representatives of all your respective parties. Firstly, I would like to express the Green Budget Coalition's strong appreciation for Budget 2018's investment of $1.3 billion over 5 years to create and manage protected areas and protect species at risk. This unprecedented federal investment has the potential to be a game changer for nature conservation in Canada and could help move Canada from laggard to leader in terrestrial and marine conservation. We are also appreciative of other funding measures in Budget 2018, and particularly $1 billion for environmental laws, new funding for First Nations drinking water and wastewater systems, protecting whale species, implementing and enforcing the federal carbon pricing system, and for science and research. Now, how this historic $1.3 billion investment is allocated will be critical to determining whether Canada delivers on our commitment to protect at least 17% of our landscape and 10% of our oceans by 2020, to substantially exceed this target in the long term and to recover species at risk. Consistent with our past recommendations, the Coalition encourages the government to allocate most of this funding to partnerships, supporting the involvement of provincial, territorial, and Indigenous governments and other partners, including for provincial parks and Indigenous protected areas, and to primarily allocate the rest to support federally led expansion and more effective management of federal protected area networks. The Coalition and our members are very interested in continuing the constructive dialogue we have had with you and your colleagues and government officials to ensure that we maximize the impact of this important federal investment. Now, secondly, on carbon pricing, I would like to reiterate the Green Budget Coalition's strong and long-standing support for implementing an effective price on greenhouse gas emissions. Climate change poses a major risk to Canadians and to the nature that Canadians hold dear, and to the nature that successive governments over the years have made major investments into protecting. A price on carbon is an important element to any climate change plan, applying the polluter pays principle and giving incentives for businesses and individuals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, move towards cleaner energy sources, and contribute to phasing out fossil fuels. We support combining a carbon price with measures that protect financially vulnerable Canadians and with measures to address competitiveness concerns that are targeted, transparent, and temporary. Research shows that along with other strong government measures, a carbon price that continues to ramp up every year to 2030 is needed for Canada to reach its 2030 greenhouse gas emission target. The sooner we take a substantive and effective action on climate change, the more effective it will be and the less it will cost Canadians. Supporting the implementation of an effective price on carbon now is an important step forward that years from now you will all be able to look back on with pride. So to conclude, I'd like to thank you all for inviting the Green Budget Coalition to appear before you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Turning then to the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, Mr. Cross, a Senior Fellow. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back. Polls show that a majority of Canadians don't understand or have never heard of a carbon tax. This demonstrates the gulf between them and the largely academic bureaucratic elite who advocate this tax. For nearly 3 years, pro-carbon tax governments and bodies such as the Eco-Fiscal Commission have controlled the commanding heights of this debate with funding and media support the fossil fuel lobby can only dream of. But they have failed to parlay these huge advantages into public understanding and support. The main economic selling point for a carbon tax is that it leads to a better tax system. However, this is strictly based on several conditions, including being revenue neutral. Every dollar raised by the carbon tax must be offset by lower income or payroll taxes. These promises were quickly forgotten, revealing it as just another tax grab that antagonized people concerned about the economy. Meanwhile, the promised reduction of carbon emissions already is falling short because the levies were not enough to materially change behavior, disillusioning environmentalists, except some of them. The carbon tax did not bridge the gap between these two opposing groups, speaking for the environment and the economy, to create the social license to build a pipeline. Finally, the election of a U.S. administration uninterested in its own carbon tax meant higher energy costs in Canada automatically put our industries at a competitive disadvantage without any prospect of lower continental emissions, making the whole exercise both costly and pointless. For a trading nation like Canada, raising the cost of domestic production but not taxing imports based on their carbon intensity penalizes our producers. This may curtail Canada's carbon emissions but does nothing for global warming if production simply moves to countries with lower emission standards. Meanwhile, Canadian exporters are at a competitive disadvantage with the U.S. As a practical matter, proponents of the tax have not disclosed what level of tax will be required to achieve Canada's climate change commitments. The case for a carbon tax has been disingenuous. Advocates rarely discuss publicly how high a carbon tax is needed to attain the lower emissions targets. If that really is the goal, is the current $50 a ton carbon tax the long-term ceiling for a carbon tax? If so, then they admit that most of the reduction in emissions is going to come from technology or regulation, since a $50 a ton tax has little impact on behavior given its inelastic demand. Or is there a plan to raise the tax towards $200 a ton, the level more transparent economists say is needed to change societal behavior enough to move significantly towards emission reduction targets? But saying so risks public support, so this is rarely mentioned. The Canadian public usually has a good sense when they're being addressed in a forthright manner. The politicians who most enthusiastically support a carbon tax are identified with left-wing governments such as in Ontario and Alberta. This has politicized carbon taxes, reducing their potential appeal to the broader base of the population concerned about climate change, but hostile to a carbon tax. Instead of cultivating broad-based support, proponents of the carbon tax smugly stay inside the safety of an echo chamber with their left-wing supporters in declared victory while demonizing opponents as dim-witted fossils from another area. Without public support across the political spectrum that would ensure its long-term viability, the tax risks disappearing after its opponents are elected. The GST shows how easy it is to get elected by promising to reduce or eliminate an unpopular tax, even if it is universally beloved by academics and bureaucrats. The failure of carbon tax advocates to gain the support across the political spectrum that legitimizes a tax and insulates it from election results reduces the very efficiency of the tax, which is supposed to be its major advantage. The rush to impose a carbon tax before properly building public support for it lowers its efficacy because even when implemented, people don't believe it will endure and therefore do not invest in those lifestyle changes that would enhance energy efficiency and not just trim energy consumption. The carbon tax is also unpopular partly because short-sighted tax-hungry politicians refuse to offset them with cuts to other taxes. More importantly, it imposes immediate costs on the vast majority of Canadians who still drive to work and heat their homes with fossil fuels, while the benefits lie decades in the future. Finally, the federal and Alberta governments must shoulder the blame for failing to deliver on their promise that a carbon tax would buy social license for pipeline construction, with the Kinder Morgan proposal the latest example. There are two fundamental flaws in the academic assumptions underpinning the carbon tax. First, it assumes that changing long-standing behaviors is best accomplished by tinkering with the price system. This ignores that the true miracle of capitalism is not the efficient allocation of resources through the price system, although that is certainly one of its attributes, but its unmatched capacity for relentless innovation and technological change. Game-changing new technologies are needed to combat climate change, not government fiddling with relative prices. The fact that our knowledge of how economics works in this area is limited to modeling the price system and not innovation is a reason to be skeptical about economics and to strive to better understand innovation, rather than focusing on the limited and less important areas economics purports to understand. Second, having claimed that a carbon tax is the most efficient way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and hence climate change, carbon tax advocates assume that slowing climate change via a carbon tax or any other mechanism itself is the most efficient way of improving the human condition. Bjorn Lomborg, the self-styled skeptical environmentalist, convened a panel of experts to ask how limited resources could be allocated for the maximum benefit. Fighting climate change ranked 17th out of 30 initiatives, behind feeding preschool children, more immunization, fighting malaria, increased crop yields, and implementing early warning systems for natural disasters like tsunamis and earthquakes. Climate change ranks low because it imposes large economic costs while delivering uncertain benefits decades in the future. We have many pressing needs that our current state of technology deals with more effectively than climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cross. Turning then to the Pembina Institute, Ms. Turcotte, Senior Analyst. Welcome.
I'd like to thank the committee for the invitation to appear today. I'm Isabelle Turcotte, Senior Analyst at the Pembina Institute. We're a national, nonpartisan think tank that advocates for effective and strong policies to support Canada's clean energy transition. We've been doing so for 30 years. My comments will be limited to Part 5 of the bill today. Canada has an unfortunate history of not respecting its promises on climate. We pulled out of Kyoto, and we're on track to missing our Copenhagen target. We made another promise in Paris, and collaboratively, over a year, coming back from Paris, we developed a new plan to keep this promise. This plan was qualified by Canada's Commissioner of Environment and Sustainable Development as, and I quote, likely one of the best plans we've seen to date. This is great news for Canadians who, according to a recent poll, want to see credible action on climate change. Indeed, this poll shows half of Canadians would only consider voting for a party committed to fighting climate change. 91% of Canadians believe we have a moral responsibility to do so for future generations. Let's be clear about what our options are. There are 3 policy options to reduce carbon pollution. These are: number 1, putting a price on carbon that results in market-based emissions reductions due to a price signal. Number 2, regulate specific actions that result in emissions reductions. For example, the new federal methane regulations. Number 3, financial support and subsidies for innovation or deployment of emissions reductions technology. For example, the Low Carbon Economy Fund that will help provinces leverage investments in clean growth. Canada's climate plan combines all 3 options. According to the economist and Nobel Prize laureate Joseph Stiglitz, a well-designed carbon price is an essential part of any strategy to reduce emissions in an efficient way. Here are 4 reasons to price carbon pollution. Number 1, it is the lowest cost pathway. As was discussed by my colleague from Ecofiscal Commission, carbon pricing not only involves lower costs than other policy approaches, but the GDP cost is low in absolute terms. Number 2, it lets industry choose its own path. Number 3, it offers stability and predictability. Carbon price gives that consistent signal to promote the investments we need today to create that competitive, low-carbon economy of tomorrow. Number 4, it ensures transparency and fairness. Carbon pricing reflects the polluter pay principles and contributes to distributing costs and benefits equitably, avoiding disproportionate burdens on vulnerable groups through revenue recycling. As was discussed earlier, only 10 to 12% of carbon pricing revenues are needed to address equity concerns for the bottom 40% of households. A price on carbon is becoming the norm around the world, and from an economic competitiveness standpoint, Canada cannot be left behind. Luckily, in 2017, pricing carbon pollution became mainstream economic policy in Canada. Pricing systems are now in place in the 4 largest provinces. The same poll I mentioned earlier found that 78% of Canadians support putting a price on carbon. Here's what we know about the impact of carbon pricing in these provinces. In 2017, Quebec, Ontario, Alberta, and BC were the 4 best performing provinces in terms of GDP. The data soundly refutes the misconception that a carbon price hurts economic competitiveness and growth. In BC, the carbon tax generated a net benefit for taxpayers, reduced taxes on employment, investments, and economic growth. BC's carbon tax did not disproportionately affect low-income households. In fact, the opposite is true, it was progressive. The federal government is now moving forward to ensure that carbon pricing is applied across Canada, and we support this. According to the federal government, a pan-Canadian price on carbon would cut carbon pollution by 80 to 90 million tons by 2022. Our own analysis at Pembina, using our energy policy simulator, which is Canada's first free open source tool, shows that even larger reductions are possible. To put this 80 to 90 million tons into perspective, Canada needs to reduce its emissions by about 250 million tons by 2030. This cannot be achieved without carbon pricing. As we sit in this room, Canadian diplomats are finishing another day of negotiations at the Bonn Intersessional, representing Canada, collaborating in good faith to implement the Paris Agreement. Pricing carbon is one of the most direct ways the Canadian government can support its own diplomats in doing the very difficult work, but important one, of convincing the rest of the world that we are capable of following through on our climate commitments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Turcotte. Then Mr. Algie with the Smart Prosperity Institute, professor at the University of Ottawa. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Thanks for inviting me. I'm here today wearing 2 hats. One of them, as you said, is I'm the chair of Smart Prosperity Institute at University of Ottawa, which is one of the major economic environment think tanks and research institutes in the world. We've got over 100 of the world's leading researchers on innovation and clean growth, and we're just awarded the largest research grant, Shirk Awards, to spend 6 years working with them to try to figure out how you drive clean innovation and growth across the economy. My second hat is we also have a leadership council that has 30 CEOs from across Canada's economy, mining, forestry, oil and gas, banks, and others who share this ambition. I want to speak to 2 main points today. The first point is why carbon pricing is important for Canada's economy. Second is why it's the most cost-effective way to reduce emissions, and if I have a minute, I may add one more about a tax incentive. But let me turn to my first point, that carbon pricing is a good idea, not just for the environment, but for Canada's economy. And don't take my word for it. Here are the words in a letter written to the Prime Minister and Premiers by a group of prominent CEOs across Canada recently. Building a high-performance, low-carbon economy is a major economic opportunity for Canada. The world's most advanced economic players are hard at work forging cleaner, more innovative economies fueled by a desire to compete in changing global markets, one with huge potential to spur growth across all parts of Canada's economy, including resource and manufacturing sectors. Putting a price on carbon to reflect the real environmental costs is the most cost-effective way to reduce emissions, stimulate innovation, and drive energy efficiency, and the revenues can be used to advance climate and economic goals. Carbon pricing is an essential part of the mix of policies, incentives, infrastructure, and investment needed to drive clean innovation, which is the key to generating climate solutions and securing Canadian competitiveness and jobs in a low-carbon world. That is from environmental radicals like John Manley, the heads of mining, forestry, aluminum associations, Dominic Barton, and CEOs representing over $300 billion in revenue and 1 million jobs across Canada. In my materials, you'll see quotes from each of them setting out why they think carbon pricing is critical to clean innovation and competitiveness for Canada. It's the same reason why more than 150 companies have signed on to the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, including all 5 of Canada's big banks and 3 major oil companies. Why 7 of the 10 largest economies in the world now price carbon, including China, which just brought in the world's largest carbon pricing market, and 10 U.S. states, representing 30% of their GDP. Carbon pricing isn't a left-wing or a right-wing idea. The 3 first carbon pricing systems in Canada were all brought in by centre-right governments in BC, Alberta, and Quebec. It's been championed around the world by conservative leaders from Arnold Schwarzenegger to Preston Manning to Angela Merkel. It's just a good idea. One of the major benefits is driving clean innovation, which is becoming a critical factor for global competitiveness in the years ahead. You can already see it beginning with the massive technology advances we've seen in clean energy and electric vehicles, driving down costs and driving up markets. And this trend is going to scale out across the economy, including resource sectors, agriculture, and manufacturing, to create global economic opportunities estimated at more than $23 trillion by the World Bank, including resource and manufacturing sectors by 2030. We just completed the most in-depth study ever done in Canada on how do you drive clean innovation. I don't recommend reading this is the Insomnia Cure. This is the short version, which was released by a group of 28 CEOs last month at Globe. The short version is that unleashing clean innovation by the private sector requires a mix of smart policies, incentives, infrastructures, and investments. But the most important of all is carbon pricing, because it sends a signal that ripples across the economy. Second point I wanted to make is that carbon pricing is the most cost-effective way to reduce emissions. You've heard several people speak to that today, so I won't say much on it, other than to say that almost every credible economist supports that idea, and there's not much that they agree on, I would add. And there's tons of evidence and experience to support it. So just look in BC at our own backyard. They brought in a carbon tax in 2008, which ramped up over 5 years like this one. In the time since that came in, if you compare BC to the rest of Canada, they've reduced GHG emissions by 7% more than the rest of the country, and their GDP has outperformed the rest of Canada by double in that period. Now, the evidence doesn't support a claim that the carbon price was the reason for the better economic performance, but it certainly didn't hurt the economy. And the same story in Europe. If you look over 8 years since their ETS came in, and this is an OECD study that just came out comparing firms covered by Europe's price to those not covered. The ones covered by it have reduced emissions by more than 11% and outperformed the other firms on revenue, growth, employment, investment, and innovation. And it's also not a perfect system, by the way. Quebec and Ontario have done better. Anyway, part of the reason for that is the revenues from pricing can be reinvested in the economy. They can be reinvested in tax cuts, as British Columbia has done. Taxpayers have come out ahead by more than $1 billion in BC because of the reinvestment. Or it can be reinvested in incentives for energy efficiency, clean vehicles, or firms to invest in clean technology, as Ontario and Alberta have done. It's one of the reasons why the 4 strongest economic performers in the country last year were the same 4 provinces that priced carbon. The last point, just to make it briefly, because this is the Finance Committee, is the CEOs in our leadership group are very concerned about competitiveness, and I'm sure all of you are too, and particularly in the wake of the U.S. tax cuts. When we released this Clean Innovation Report last month, one of the recommendations they made was, in addition to going ahead with carbon pricing, which is critical for innovation, was to pair it with targeted tax incentives, one of which is an accelerated capital cost allowance for all clean technology. In the U.S., they've given an accelerated capital cost allowance for all technology, even dirty technology. Matching that just for clean technology would send a signal that would reduce emissions, increase investment in Canada in leading-edge technology, and be good for reducing costs for firms and competitiveness. So I recommend that to you. Anyway, just to wrap up, this country has a history of far-sighted policy leadership to prepare Canada for major economic changes. We did it 30 years ago when we realized the world was moving towards freer trade. Even though we were a nation built on economic protectionism for a century, the Conservative government at the time got ahead of the global change by bringing in a free trade agreement. They also signed the UN Convention on Climate Change, by the way. It was the same government that did both. We're at that same kind of moment now. The world is moving towards a low-carbon economy as a fundamental economic shift, and we need that same kind of far-sighted policy leadership from our governments today, and people will look back on it in the same non-partisan way that we look back at the free trade agreement as a wise decision for Canada's economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Elgee. Then going to 7-minute rounds, starting with Mr. Graywell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our panelists for coming today. I think that we've heard in the last 2 panels that there's an overwhelming consensus, except for one panelist, that we shall not remain, that the facts support a price on carbon. Now, we can disagree on what type of price that will entail, the process of that price, whether it should be revenue neutral, but the facts do support that pricing carbon will lead to a reduction in GHG gas emissions. We also know factually across the world, when you look at any economist, that or any environmentalist that the Earth is getting warmer. I mean, over the next century, it's supposed to go to an increase of 3 to 5.3 degrees Celsius, which is the biggest increase that we will ever have had in the history of planet Earth. And that's a challenge. Like Stuart said, that, Canada has to be forward-thinking. They need to meet this challenge head-on. You mentioned that, across the globe, in economies that have done carbon pricing, that they've had actually stronger economies and good economic growth. Can you please talk to that a little bit more, even outside the Canadian context, to see what other jurisdictions in the world have done a carbon price and their corresponding GDP growth?
That's to me?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, you need enough years to be able to draw any kind of real conclusions, which is why Europe is the best place to do this. They've had carbon taxes going back to the 1990s in 5 or 6 countries. So I've put 2 studies in my materials because a picture's worth 1,000 words. One of them looks at the 6 countries that brought in carbon taxes in the 1990s. And what it shows is over a period of about 20 years, those countries, if you just isolate just the effects of the tax shift, nothing else, reduce carbon emissions by anywhere from about 3 to 6%. And those are relatively low taxes. They also saw GDP gains, not big ones, but anywhere from kind of 0 to 1%. So frankly, within the range of error of the models. Second is this OECD study that compared under the European system firms that are covered with those that aren't covered. And again, the firms that were covered by the carbon price had 11% greater emission reductions, but you'd expect that. But what it also found is they outperformed the firms that were not covered in terms of revenue, investment, employment, and innovation. And the same study found that there was almost no evidence of economic leakage, which means firms moving elsewhere for competitiveness reasons. Part of that's because you reinvest the revenues as a way of creating economic incentives to spur clean growth in your economy. There's also, I mean, even Australia, while it had its carbon tax in, actually did better than the OECD average in terms of economic growth and did better in terms of reducing emissions than it had before and after the carbon tax. It may not have been a political success in Australia, but it was actually a good policy while it was in place. Only 2 years of evidence.
Yeah, there's always a balance between politics and policy.
Ms. Turcotte wants in as well, and I would say anybody wants in, just raise your hand and I'll catch you. We do have a fair bit of time left. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to add something to this conversation on the impact of carbon pricing through the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. This was a cap-and-trade program that was put in place in 2009 in the northeastern United States that joined 9 member states. And interestingly, under Governor Chris Christie, New Jersey pulled out of the RGGI and is now wanting to join, is on track to join again, and so is Virginia. So the RGGI members will go from 9 to 11 members soon. And the latest analysis on the impact, I'll just give you a few numbers here. RGGI provided $1.4 billion in net economic benefits. It led to the creation of 14,500 job years, generated over $2.8 billion in revenue from permit sales, and very importantly, it cut into CO2 emissions in member states. And also, it cut into power prices in New England.
Mr. Grabo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your answers. My next question is, Stuart, you spoke about providing more incentive to become more green, especially from a competitiveness standpoint. You spoke about the reduction in corporate taxes in the U.S. Obviously, a lot of firms in Canada are concerned with that. We're concerned with the flight of capital. Having said that, we've had very strong economic growth last year, and we're expected to be above 2% in GDP growth this year. You mentioned the capital cost allowance for clean technology. Can you expand on how that would be very favorable for Canadian firms and the Canadian economy?
Yes, sure. So, I mean, part of what this proposed backstop bill does to help deal with the competitiveness issues is it's output-based pricing, which is a good idea. Basically, major producing firms and exporters will still have all the incentive to reduce, but the total cost of carbon price to them will be reduced dramatically. So you get the benefits of a price without all the economic costs. But to add to that incentive, basically what a carbon price does, if it works, is it incents these firms to spend a bunch of money adopting leading-edge low-carbon technology, which is a good thing. It positions them for where the economy is going, but in the short run, it's still a cost. It's still an investment. So if you give an accelerated capital cost allowance, it basically reduces the cost of investing in the very low-carbon technologies that you want the firms to invest in. So that, A, saves them money, but it saves them money in a targeted way by promoting investment in the kinds of clean technologies we want. And it's a tax incentive that promotes investment in Canada. The money has to be spent here in order to get the credit for it. So if you think about the things the U.S. has done, they brought in 100% capital cost allowance for anything, including a coal plant. You can get 100% capital. That's not a great idea. But targeting it in Canada to support investment in the kinds of technologies that we want to prepare our economy for the future is a really good win-win solution.
Did you want in earlier, Mr. Cross? I don't know, your light come on. Okay, Mr. Greywell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My last question is simply this, is that, I think that if I think about Brampton East, carbon pricing doesn't come up much in my riding. I represent a riding that's the second most diverse riding in the entire country, which 86% of the population is associated with a visible minority. Having said that, we're very well-to-do riding. It's an upper middle-class riding where the average house price is between $800,000 to $1 million, right? I've never got one call on carbon pricing. If I were to try to explain carbon pricing to my father, he would just turn to me and say, what are you talking about? But if I can talk to him about, the recent windstorm that took off shingles off our roof, or talk about the recent weather changes and give him concrete examples, he may try to understand why there needs to be a climate change policy in this country. You guys are the experts, and I know one thing for sure is that my dad, when he votes, I know he's a little bit biased, he votes for me, but when he votes, he expects that his vote will be made for a member that will listen to experts when it comes to policy that will not only be for Canada today, but Canada in the future. So I'd like to thank you on behalf of all Canadians for the work that you guys do, and that climate change is super important, and our government's going to do everything we can to ensure that there's a price on carbon. Thank you.
Mr. Albas, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses, and I hope MP Greywell can count on the support of his own father in his own riding. So, that politics aside, I think, Mr. Algie, you had pointed out that in the United States that they have created the equivalent of a CCA, capital cost allowance, where within 1 year they can, and it could be used towards any kind of equipment, including, as you said, a coal-fired facility. I think that illustrates the example that if we were to do something similar here only for clean technology, that for many people they would say many of those clean technologies are much more intermittent than a coal-fired generation facility. I'm not arguing for coal, but I am saying it's a competitive challenge because coal can be done quite cheaply in comparison to intermittent energy sources. So I think this raises the bigger question of competitiveness. And I do also think that we need to discuss about carbon leakage. So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask each of the witnesses. Mr. Algie talked a little bit in his presentation, and so did Mr. Cross. What is your definition of carbon leakage? And in regard to C-74, I just would like to hear what you have to say about those two things, your definition of carbon leakage.
Who wants to go ahead, Andrew?
Broadly, our definition would be that it relates to economic activities that leave one jurisdiction and go to another because of differing carbon prices in this context.
Thank you.
I'd agree with that. It's imposing a tax on domestic production and not imports, and you end up just substituting imported carbon emissions for formerly domestically produced ones. It is possible to devise a tax that would account for that, but none of the carbon taxes we're talking about in this country address that problem at all.
There are many elements that will influence competitiveness of any industrial sector, and the federal government's backstop does provide a measure through the output-based pricing system that protects these industries against one element, which is a difference in carbon price between the price in Canada and the price in a competing jurisdiction.
As the father of 5-year-old twins, I'm an expert in leakage of all kinds. I'll talk about the carbon kind. So what you don't want is what my colleagues alluded to, which is firms to simply move across the border, continue to emit the same emissions they would have emitted in your country, and keep all the revenues and jobs there. That's the lose-lose option. What you do want, though, is to keep your firms here and give them an incentive to be among the leaders in low-carbon production, because then they're going to get ready to compete where the world is going. And so, you kind of want to have both, right? Which is why you want to ease the economic transition the same way we did. There was an economic transition in the free trade agreement era for a few years as you moved from kind of a closed economy to an open one. There'll be an economic transition here. And things like output-based pricing, things like accelerated capital cost allowance, things like revenue recycling, help firms as they make the transition to being low carbon competitive without having to move elsewhere to do that. And it shouldn't be a long-term solution. In the long term, free markets are going to determine this. But this country's supported firms during economic transitions for 100 years, and we should do the same here.
I want to appreciate what Ms. Turcotte said specifically within Canada, because C-74, in essence, is taking away the ability of a province. Let's give the example of Saskatchewan, that has built itself on being competitive with its neighbors. You also have northern territories like Mr. McLeod's that are just their cost of living and the cost of doing business is so much higher. So to be imposing a centralized framework, upon them, basically may seal up Canada in terms of interjurisdictional between provinces and territories. But now it actually, with the United States being different, at a different rate, I think that we need to have a little more discussion. Now, here's what the BC NDP provincial government describes as carbon leakage in its 2018 budget. Industries that compete with industry in countries that may have low or no carbon price. If industry loses market share to more polluting competitors, known as carbon leakage, it affects our economy and does not reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. This, of course, is in BC with a carbon tax already. Now, I should say, my end quote here, is that gas emissions. So this is coming from British Columbia with a carbon tax already. We've already seen at a lower price that was first installed by Premier Campbell and his government, where the cement industry was hard hit and has continued to receive subsidies and struggled to maintain its market share. Now, I believe, Mr. Chair, that the BC NDP are also quite worried about one of their favorite industries, which is pulp and paper. And you know what? We all have our favorite industries. But I think the rising cost in the carbon tax, as set out in C-74, as of April 1st, we saw gas prices go up in British Columbia because they are moving $5 per year. It will only get worse. Are we, under what obligation do we have as parliamentarians to ensure that those industries where many families are impacted, those small business, medium-sized businesses where they'll be impacted, to be able to stem this issue of carbon leakage? I'd open it to anyone.
Who wants to go? Ms. Turcotte, you're the one that's looking restless there. I'd say you're in deck.
I would say that we do want to address these competitiveness issues. However, I don't think that the federal carbon pricing backstop should address intra-jurisdictional competitiveness issues, and it is a challenge to address those issues with our foreign competitors, and we are still in the process of developing those output-based standards, which will provide that relief and that protection for those sectors. I would say, however, that Canadians as a society overall have that responsibility to meet the Paris target for many reasons, including for the cost of inaction that we've heard my colleagues refer to earlier. And if we the output-based pricing system is also a subsidy to industry, and it should be said that if we reduce the industry's responsibility to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we're increasing the burden elsewhere. So that
will the United States meet their Paris targets?
Personally, I would not want to have Trump as my role model. And
no, I'm just asking the question because I do think it's relevant because, again, we have tax reform in the United States. Mr. Elgie gave the example of a capital cost allowance that gives a real advantage to our American producers.
I would say that regardless of Trump's decision to withdraw of the Paris Agreement, which he cannot do until one day after the next election. There's an initiative in the United States called We Are Still In, which is a gathering of private sector and states which are taking even more ambitious action to compensate for the lack of federal leadership.
Well, I would just simply suggest that chances are they won't, and I imagine that other countries will struggle with these kinds of things, particularly on the competitiveness. Mr. Cross, you directly in your submission talked about the increasing uncertainty in economic relations between Canada and the United States and the rolling back of certain corporate, whether it be we're talking regulatory measures or we're talking tax relief or tax cuts in the reform bill. In your expert opinion, what implications do you foresee with a national carbon tax having on the competitiveness of Canadian industries vis-a-vis with the United States and other non-carbon tax jurisdictions?
Well, I think it's just part of a wide range of policies that are making Canada less competitive. I think we're already seeing it show up in the investment numbers, for example. There was a semi-annual survey from the PMI Institute was released this morning on business investment in the U.S. It's calling for a 10% increase. The survey 6 months ago, the same survey in the U.S. called for a 2.7% increase. That's a radical upgrade of business investment plans in a very short period of time. Meanwhile, Canada is headed for a fourth consecutive decline in business investment, according to a survey, a then annual survey conducted by my former colleagues at Statistics Canada. That gap between 10% in the U.S. and a small decline in Canada is probably the most distinctive difference between the two countries that I could point to these days, and probably has the most risks for Canada in the long term. I'd be quite concerned about it.
Thank you all. Mr. Dussault.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thanks to the witnesses for being here today. My first question deals with something that we heard from a witness earlier who mentioned that we shouldn't ask people to change anything. People should be allowed to live their lives, continue to live normally, and do things as if nothing were going on. But according to you, if we don't change the behavior of most human beings on Earth, will that change the behavior of human activity? Will that mitigate climate change? Do you think it's realistic? By changing absolutely nothing in terms of the way we live our lives, we will be able to cope with climate change. Mr. Cross seems to have an opinion. Yes, I'd like to begin. The question for me is this: how can you produce a change? Do you impose a change? Does the government impose it? Do you impose a change through a change in relative pricing? Then, of course, that will change behavior. Or do you proceed through technological change, which will make a change easier for persons in terms of using that technology at a higher cost? But the witness, Mr. Kenney, I'm referring to, seemed to say that if people continue going to the hockey arena with their big SUVs, what effect does that have? Are they entitled to do so? Should they be penalized? Perhaps you, sir, would be willing to answer the question.
Penalizing anyone, I think clearly most or all, hopefully all of us around this table understand that climate change is a major challenge and a huge risk to society, and that the solution involves changes, and the best solution involves changes that have the least disruption to people's lives and provide the most benefits. And that's where carbon pricing is the prime policy option that I've ever heard of. It allows people to choose, gives them the incentives to choose the options that work best for them.
Effectivement, c'est un thème récurrent. Je pense qu'on entend aussi de dire.
We have also heard it said that it's one of the tools that is available to reach the ends that we seek, probably the most interesting one. Mr. Cross, you said that it would be better known, or it has to be better known or better accepted amongst the people at large, amongst the population, for the government to act. So what can be done to help people understand and recognize the solution, the path towards the solution that would be more promising? I remember in 2011, 2013, I was in the House, but at that time, there was general demonization. They demonized the NDP carbon tax in terms of being the most diabolical plan existing at that time in Canada, that people shouldn't expect that to work. They didn't. Well, let me just say this by way of answer. Stuart noted that there is a very high concentration amongst economists that a tax on consumption is better than a tax on income. But economists have never been able to convince the ordinary person about that. Just think of what surrounded the GST, the creation of that tax. Well, I can't answer your question. I think that's a question that would have to be asked to someone who is a proponent of a carbon tax. Perhaps not me. Sir, you?
All economists agree that a carbon tax is the most cost-effective way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I guess I'd say a couple of things. One is, we've heard from a couple of people this idea that there's a choice between putting a price on carbon and spurring technology innovation. And they're actually not a choice. The two are integrally related. You need both. And part of what spurs technology innovation is the idea that you may actually sell that technology someday. And what helps you sell that technology is having a price on pollution. Part of the reason why we don't see adequate levels of clean innovation is that even though carbon and other kinds of pollution are a real cost, they're not priced by the economy. They're what economists call an externality. Even conservative right-wing economies like Milton Friedman used to tell his University of Chicago students that his free market theories don't work when it comes to pollution because private markets don't price pollution. So putting a price on carbon is one of the critical things that you need to drive the invention and the adoption of these clean technologies. Not the only thing, but it's vital.
Ouais. Justement, sur les prix de la pollution, c'est souvent aussi quelque chose.
With respect to carbon pricing, we've heard that it's the polluter who should pay across the board in a variety of domains. Do you think that makes more sense in the 21st century as we speak now, that somebody who seeks to pollute, who seeks to leave polluting waste should pay a tax at a municipal level or at a provincial level? Can you explain your concept of what makes sense about what already exists and works and what would be represented by a catch-up tax, as was addressed by Madame Turcotte?
Yes, I'll just speak rapidly to that, to say how we ensure that people understand the whole concept and the need for carbon pricing, but we have to explain how it works rather than exploiting where people use political information politically to their own benefit. So I'd say that yes, we agree, and I mean by we, the Pembina Institute, we agree with the polluter pay concept, but we recognize that it's not the only component in the federal government's climate change plan. And there's funding of innovation, and we believe in all of those measures together.
Here we're over. Mr. Fergus.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Puis j'aimerais.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like also to thank all of the witnesses who came today. One of the great privileges of being an MP is that we have the opportunity to sit down and listen and exchange ideas with very intelligent people who are experts in their domain. And I'd also like to salute all of your contributions to the development of policies in Canada. Mr. Cross, I'm a great fan of yours, and I'd like to thank you for your 36-year career at Statistics Canada. It speaks very well of you.
I believe, and perhaps I misheard in your opening comments, how you felt that you had attributed some of the proponents for putting a price on carbon, pour ceux qui préconisent le prix sur le carbone, la tarification du carbone.
For those who talk about the pricing of carbon.
Actual elite. Did I misunderstand that?
I think no. I think that's very. I mean, we saw in the previous presenters and now in this one, you know, the vast majority of the commentators in this area believe fervently that a carbon tax is the most efficient way of achieving this goal. So they may very well be right. The problem is, though, they have not been able to get that message through to the public. So they end up talking to each other, and they convince each other, but the message seems to flop with the public. We saw exactly the same thing play out with the GST with sales taxes, and they seem to have not learned the lesson. Sorry.
Then I would sort of see two things on that front. I mean, one of them is, first of all, when I listen to Mr. Elgee present and I take a look at the number of non-academics who are supporting, I mean, I'm certain all these companies that have signed on to the Smart Prosperity Leaders Initiative, over 150 companies, a whole bunch of companies from the Desjardins Group to Enerchem to all the major banks to Synovus to big leaders. It seems to me that these are not necessarily your academic elites, but these are people who are practicing, who very much have skin in the game, and who compete globally and who really want to make sure that their companies remain globally competitive and at the top of their game. So I'm just a little perplexed about how a person of your stature could still hold that point of view, which seems a little bit ad hominem.
The average person, though, I'm glad you raised that, because it was a point I wanted to make in response to Stuart's opening statement, that yes, large corporations like this, large corporations are those that are best suited to deal with complex regulations. Large corporations tend to like a lot of government involvement in the economy. It's the small and medium-sized businesses that have a very bad reaction to this. It's a real imposition for them, and they don't have the resources internally to figure out how best to deal with a lot of these things. So again, it goes back to perhaps I shouldn't say just an academic bureaucratic elite. Mind you, when I say bureaucratic elite, I include most large corporations as large bureaucracies. So
again, and perhaps I'll ask this question, my final point would be, aren't those organizations, those large organizations, large companies, corporate Canada, that has to do they do most of the trading internationally. They're the ones who will face global competition. And they're the ones who have to understand, really, that, as my former colleague had said earlier, have to really understand where that puck is going to be. And to play where that puck is going to be, as opposed to just trying to following the play at every single stage. You have to anticipate, and this is one of the ways that it seems that if you want to make change on dealing with climate change, that you have to seek out the best ways of doing so at the minimum amount of disruption and cost. And it seems that there's a large consensus amongst people who are practitioners in the economy, as well as people who've given some great thought to this as academics or as researchers, that the single best way, and perhaps this is a question for Mr. Elgee, and you can add to my comments, that the single best way is for us to proceed with putting a price on carbon. That is, making sure that it does not become an externality, a free rider in the system.
Yeah, I think that's the first point, is that this is a real cost. And part of Milton Friedman's Adam Smith's invisible hand is that free markets work when they charge real costs. So the reason we have too much pollution in the world is that private markets don't naturally capture those costs, and it falls upon government to actually be responsible for imposing that collective cost so that markets work more efficiently, not just for environmental reasons, but for economic efficiency. One of the things I've found is a lot of the people who oppose carbon pricing, or none of them, can come up with a more cost-effective way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. They say, well, I don't like the cost of a carbon tax, but I've never heard a single one of them come up with a more cost-effective way to reduce emissions. And so I'm left wondering, if they really just don't believe genuinely reducing greenhouse gas emissions or not. So that would be an interesting debate to have. And I think in terms of this issue of how much the public gets, it's probably some truth to it. I would say there's lots of things in terms of running an economy that not everyone understands. When the governor of the Bank of Canada changes the interest rate, or the Bank of Canada rate, I'm not sure everybody, including me, understands all the reasons they do that. But that's part of the reason why we have governments to show leadership, is I think the average person does understand when they look around them and they see more and more high mileage vehicles and electric cars on the road. They see that when they flip their electricity switch on, it's coming from clean sources. They see more and more energy efficient buildings. They see the world is changing. They see that the world is moving towards a cleaner, more innovative, low carbon economy, and that things are still working fine, that we can make that change. And they understand that we need to accelerate that change. And part of the reason we elect governments is to help them figure out how to do that. So would it be great if every person understood all the economics of a carbon price? Sure. But partly we have governments to help make those leadership decisions.
Mr. Cross wanted in, and you're at a time. Mr. Cross.
Just to...
Yeah, it is. It's on my time. Your clock's wrong. Mr. Cross.
Yeah, just to follow up on the original question, which was, yes, it is quite interesting that it is large corporations, not just in Canada, but in the US, in Europe. It's especially large corporations that are in favor of a carbon tax. What is their motivation? Are they advocating the type of $200, $300 ton tax that is needed to meet the goals? Or are they trying to impose, something $50, $100 a ton that would be an inconvenience to their smaller and medium-sized competitors? I'll let you speculate on what their motivation is. I don't hear a lot of them advocating $200.
A short question.
Given the level of the proposed carbon tax that we have, how much would income taxes have to be reduced to compensate for that level of price that we would put on a carbon? Is there any estimate or any research that any of you have seen to that?
I can only point to a figure that was stated earlier by Dale Buchan, which says that 10 to 12% of carbon pricing revenue are sufficient to address fairness and equity concerns for the bottom 40% of households in Canada. If I may, I keep hearing the $200 to $300 figure, and is this under the assumption that this is what we're advocating for?
No,
Okay.
This is, in fact, it's partly based on, I heard a lot of these numbers thrown out by Mr. Kenny at the end of his previous testimony. I've heard professors, the name escapes me at the moment, there's one particular at the University of BC that's very openly said, we're going to need at least a $200 a ton target to meet our reductions.
But is that if we were to meet our Paris target through only a carbon tax?
Yes.
No other measure, which we're not suggesting.
Right.
Okay.
The other point, too, is one thing we know about technology innovation is if you'd asked someone 20 years ago what it would cost to have a laptop or a smartphone, they would have said thousands and thousands of dollars based on the current technology. But part of what we'll do with things like an economic incentive for carbon pricing is drive down the cost of technology. It's the reason why the costs of wind and solar have gone down 80% in the last 8 years, and you've seen a similar decline in the cost of electric car batteries, is that pricing plus other incentive measures are driving down the costs that are actually reducing the cost of transitioning to a low-carbon economy. In most parts of the world, many parts, it's actually cheaper to produce energy through wind and solar now than it is through coal. Now, your point about storage is a valid one. We're going to have to make that same kind of breakthrough on energy storage for that to be a sustainable base load, but there's lots of really bright people working on doing that, and whoever cracks that one's going to make a lot of money. Let's make it here in Canada. We got some players that are in the game on that one.
Okay, before I turn to Mr. Kelly, just on this discussion on the message getting to people, the experts, I guess, or bureaucracies talking to themselves. I talk to farmers and fishermen a lot. I campaigned a campaign on the green shift, and I can tell you it wasn't a pleasant campaign. Yet at the and they're very worried, even though they're exempted in the in at least the federal legislation on fuels, which is their biggest cost. Yet at the same token, I can tell you from experience in Prince Edward Island, a lot of farmers, when the Maritime Electric or through the province went to 30%, 30% of the energy comes from windmills. When that first started, even though everyone was complaining about the cost of electricity, you had the option of buying the more expensive electricity, and I can't believe, I did myself, and so did a lot of farmers. They went to the more expensive electricity, even though they were complaining about the price of electricity, because it was clean. But isn't part of my question from that isn't part of the problem here that the public really doesn't trust governments to be revenue neutral? I mean, it came up in the discussion previously. The public just doesn't believe us when we say that this carbon pricing will be revenue neutral. How do we change that, or can we? Anybody got any brilliant answers, Stuart?
I guess I'd start just by questioning the issue of whether or not carbon pricing must be revenue neutral. I think governments make choices about how to spend tax monies all the time. That's part of the fundamental reason we elect governments. I think there are a lot of strong, and I'm the co-founder of the Ecofiscal Commission, so I believe in everything it's done. I think there are a lot of strong economic arguments for taking carbon tax revenues and reinvesting them in tax cuts. And probably if I were elected, I'd put a lot of the revenues towards that. But when government reinvests in the economy, whether it be in clean infrastructure, public transit that lowers the cost for people to get around, home energy incentives that lower people's fuel and heating costs for their homes, incentives for companies to invest in clean technology that increase their profitability, those are all investments in the economy too. Those are all investments that can actually reap economic rewards. In fact, your government is making a massive investment in infrastructure on that very same argument, that building the physical and technology platform for the future is a really smart investment in the economy. So I think there's a strong argument for tax cuts, but if you look at the modeling we've done at Ecofiscal, for example, reinvesting the revenue in technology incentives, both for businesses and homeowners, generates almost the same positive economic outcomes as reinvesting it in income tax cuts.
Okay, Mr. Kelly, 5-minute round.
Thank you. So I have a brief question for Professor Elgee. So you mentioned in the response to Mr. Alvis's question about carbon leakage, you spoke of the danger of a lose-lose scenario where simply production shifts to a different jurisdiction. So with that in mind, I'd like to return to something you'd said, I think, in your opening statement. You mentioned that the 3 CEOs of the largest oil and gas companies operating in Canada have signed on with your initiative. Can you tell me how many employees did those 3 companies lay off since 2014, and how many billions of dollars of investment have been redeployed to jurisdictions outside of Canada by those 3 companies?
Listen, that's a very real concern, and I talk with them about that all the time. I can tell you what their answer is, and they know the answer better than I do, so I'll relay what they tell me. One is, the shift in capital for oil and gas is largely driven by global oil prices and the fact that the U.S. has developed low-cost oil and gas fields largely through fracking. So the fundamentals of reinvestment are driven mainly by those 2 factors.
I was hoping for an answer to the numbers of how much has moved and how many, but I didn't want to.
But there are a significant number.
Okay.
But it's not due to carbon pricing is their answer.
Okay. But they've signed on to your initiative, and they are the companies that are right now have laid off. Those companies in particular have probably laid off significant numbers of people in my riding. I have thousands of residents in my riding that are unemployed from the oil and gas industry. I'd like to move to Mr. Cross, and and this is, we've discussed this. So the government has repeatedly said that the carbon tax is going to be revenue neutral, and yet they refuse to disclose to us what the cost will be. They refuse to disclose what their own projections are for the result on emissions. They have refused to provide Canadians with the modeling that they have done. So I wonder if you have done your own modeling, or if you have information that could share on what you, in your studies, think would the average cost to a Canadian family might be, and whether or not this tax will in fact reduce emissions.
No, sorry, we haven't done any modeling on that. You might be asking the wrong person. I did work 36 years at Statistics Canada, as you mentioned. We have lots and lots of models. I'm not sure I believe any of them. It was the models that got us into the, for example, my skepticism towards models was reinforced, was solidified by the behavior of banks running up to the 2008 financial crisis. That was all due to models based on, oh, house prices will never fall at the same time across the United States because that's never happened before on record. So I'm very skeptical about the utility of models in a lot of these questions.
Yeah, and don't misunderstand from my
One final thing I'll add about models is we don't have a model of innovation. There's a suggestion here from Stuart that economists understand innovation, and if we play with the price system and we add some incentives, you know, we put some inputs in, and this output will come out in technological change. Economics does not have a theory of innovation. I'm sorry. As the one economist on this panel, let me assure you of that.
Thank you. And it wasn't to defend modeling as a policy tool, but merely to point out that if they shared whatever modeling they had, then an economist like yourself would be in a position to judge the quality of the modeling or the methodology they've used. The fact is, there has been no disclosure from this government. They have steadfastly refused, including at this committee table last Thursday, where the Minister of Finance refused to answer the question repeatedly about how much this tax will cost the average family and how much it will actually reduce emissions.
My last comment on models is I'm not against modeling. Modeling is a great way to organize your thoughts about something, to highlight what are the important assumptions. The problem, as somebody put it, is don't believe your models.
All right.
Yeah, you're out of time. Mr. MacLeod.
And I appreciate all the presenters here today. Climate change is something that is very real in my riding. I represent Northwest Territories, and we certainly see the impacts. Yesterday, the river broke on the Mackenzie, and the ice moved. And I had a lot of people contact me and voice concern about how thin the ice is. Ice is about 1.5 feet thick, and when I was growing up as a young child, the ice was 5 to 7 feet thick, and it was a spectacular event to see the Mackenzie River break up. It was lots of thundering noise and ice pushing up the bank. You don't get that anymore. And I flew over the Beaufort Sea this winter in January, and it hadn't froze in many parts. It was still open, and we've never seen that before. People in the communities are saying they're not able to go hunting. They used to be able to go 40 miles onto the ocean, and now they can barely go 5. And so we're really starting to see a lot of impact, and a lot of people are asking, what can we do? And climate pricing on pollution is one area we can certainly focus on, but there needs to be more. If we're going to have an impact, we certainly have to do a lot of the things at the same time. And it's going to require, if we're going to have, I think somebody mentioned today that if we're going to have change, we need good planning. And many of the Indigenous governments that I represent, we have 7 large Indigenous governments in my riding that talk about land use planning. Every one of them wants to do land use planning, where we have a plan where we develop the economic opportunities, and in the same plan we also have conservation areas. And my question is for the Green Budget Coalition, because I know you work with organizations that work with protected areas, but also do a lot of planning on how we can protect what we have. And can you maybe just talk a little bit about the importance of a good plan, especially a land use plan where we can do conservation planning, economic planning, protect our historic sites, take into consideration what the Indigenous governments are telling us in areas that are sacred to them, and have everybody have buy-in rather than just always button heads on the issues.
Thank you. I think that's a really important issue to raise, and I think we've been increasingly realizing over the years that an effective, successful protected area is not just a piece of land cut out on a map, but where we take time and we engage, especially Indigenous knowledge and the knowledge of others who live in the area, and deal with people with job creation aspects and the cultural value in the neighborhood, in the areas. And that's part of why when we made our recommendation for funding around protected areas you need funding for the process to get started in the creation of the protected area and the long-term management. And we've been particularly supportive of the Indigenous Guardians proposal as a way to engage the knowledge and wisdom of Indigenous communities. And we're also very optimistic about the Ndige protected area in your riding that we're hoping will continue to be formalized.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I'm glad you mentioned Ndige because Ndige started many, many years ago. And since the actual application came in, was submitted, we have since seen 2 diamond mines apply and get approved. So we know there's a different process for economic projects versus protecting areas. Now, do you really think that the protected areas strategy is working? I know there was 8 submissions in my riding, and I don't see any of them being finalized. And I've been watching for over 10 years on some of them. And is it something that we continue to pursue, or do we just park it and try something else?
I'll admit to not being an expert on the protected area strategy. My sense is that there are very well-meaning individuals and organizations involved, and they're trying to strike the right balance between a number of different stakeholders, as you mentioned, whose interests all matter. And that can be a challenging process, as the carbon pricing discussion is showing also.
Very short.
One last question to Stuart regarding carbon pricing. I have a hard time trying to figure out what the actual number should be for carbon pricing, and it seems like a lot of people are taking a lot of guessing in terms of what should it be. But carbon pricing is not dependent, it's not on its own, it's dependent on what else happens. If we're going to meet the target for the long run in 30, 40 years, we can't put a number on it until we know what else is involved to try to reduce the carbon issues. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I mean, your points about the north, I think, really hit home. I lived in Alaska for years, on the other side of the border in the north. I mean, to me, it helps looking forward. If you imagine 20 years from now, it's not that hard to imagine what a future low-carbon economy will look like. We will use a lot less energy in our homes, our vehicles, and our businesses, and the energy we use will be generated by low-carbon sources or fossil fuel-free sources. The challenge is, and the world will get to that place, the challenge is accelerating our pace to get to that place. It's particularly important for folks in the north because your ability to access things like low emission vehicles and clean energy sources is tougher. And so I would say, in addition to carbon pricing, things like a major investment in clean energy sources for the north, and that's a big part of that is infrastructure. It's really important right now. Infrastructure is going to be around for 30 years, so we need to build the infrastructure for a 2030 or 2040 economy today. I grew up in Toronto, and I think about, if you ever go across that Bloor Street Bridge, there's a little subway line that runs right under it, and that was built before anyone had subways. But someone was thinking ahead and said, I'm going to build that subway line now, knowing that in 10 or 15 years we're going to need subways. And we've got to make those same kind of forward-looking decisions today so that we're actually ready for the low-carbon world that's going to come tomorrow, whether we like it or not. I think governments, we talked a lot about the impact of prices, and we all feel them, me too. Governments can't insulate the public from economic changes. I think your job is to prepare people for it and to help them make those transitions, and I take my hat off and admire you for your efforts to do so.
Thank you both. Mr. Albas and then Mr. Fergus will split 6 minutes.
Great,
Mr.
thank
Albas.
you. Mr. Cross, if you could briefly comment on what you think the impact on low to medium income families, which Liberals claim to be helping the most in regards to this bill.
Well, I think that's one of the problems with carbon taxes and sales taxes in general. They do tend to be regressive. Low and medium income families spend a proportionally larger share of their budget on these energy sources. So it's inevitably going to be regressive.
Are you familiar with Chi Man Yip's submission in the Journal of Environmental Economics and Management? It came out recently on the labor market consequences of environmental taxes. Are you familiar with that?
No, regrettably, the Journal of Environmental Economics is not one of the publications I subscribe to.
So one of the things he says is, first, the policy raises the overall unemployment rate by 1.3 percentage points. Second, unemployment effects appear regardless of gender or educational category and are significantly different across demographic groups. Males of lower educational levels suffer the brunt of unemployment effects. So would you say that there are more than just the harm to families in terms of the revenue that comes in, or pardon me, the money that they pay out for a carbon tax, but this could also cause unemployment and particularly...
So that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that, but yes, there's going to be a difference by gender too. This is because more men work in the goods producing industries, manufacturing, oil and gas. That sector is going to be disproportionately affected. So there will be a gender effect, since we're all supposed to have gender analyses about everything we do now.
Yes, and unfortunately that's not being shared with us. So I'll just go back to what Mr. Algie had said earlier about the reasons for relocation of certain companies to other jurisdictions. First of all, the government is pursuing a multi-layered strategy here. The price on carbon is one, but obviously they're increasing regulations. We had Mr. John Moffat from the Minister of the Environment, or for Environment Canada, and he said that there's going to be more innovation, which he basically, vis-a-vis to me, was subsidies. So are we not going to get where we will, instead of the invisible hand setting a price within a single market, because we're part of an integrated economy, both Canada, the United States, and in fact the world, we're going to be pounded by having higher prices, higher regulations, and in addition, we're going to have to subsidize our market. In fact, Mr. Moffat said that he anticipates market failures. Now, I don't think he means market failures as in the market doesn't function. In it, I think he means market failures in terms of businesses will not be able to compete. Therefore, we have to subsidize to keep them open. Are you concerned about these kinds of the integration of the Canadian economy while seeing some of these policies move forward?
Yeah, I'm really concerned about competitiveness. I think, to be honest, the world is going to move to a low-carbon economy whether Canada likes it or not. And I think to me, the challenge is, does Canada prepare itself to be competitive in terms of generating wealth and jobs where that economy is going? And I think that's a real concern. In terms of the transition, carbon pricing is the most cost-effective way to reduce emissions. And I've yet to hear today or anywhere else someone come up with a more cost-effective solution to reduce emissions. That said, it's not perfect. There are some things it doesn't reach as well. And Ecofiscal's put out a whole report on that, which I won't bore you with today, but I can give you the link for the reasons where you may, in the short term, need other regulations or other incentives to help accelerate the transition. So I think we're looking at fuels, coal phase out, and a couple of other areas where there's going to be specific regulations, methane. Those regulations are necessary because pricing won't do all the work fast enough to get us there. But we do have to deal with the competitiveness impacts of doing that. That's why things like output-based pricing, that's why I suggested things like the accelerated capital cost allowance. If we're going to be pushing firms to make those investments, let's give them some relief to help lower the cost of doing so.
But you see right now the Trump administration
Sorry guys, I got to give Greg, or we're going to be out of time here. Greg's the next questioner. Sorry.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Ms. Turcotte and perhaps also for the other witnesses. I admit that there will be a cost to the economy with the imposing of carbon pricing, but there's also a cost to inaction. So could you speak to us a bit so that we'll have it in the written record, what the costs of inaction would be if we decide not to meet the challenge that climate change represents? Yes, absolutely. In fact, the cost of inaction, I have a figure here, which is to 21 to
by 2050, according to 2011 estimates from the National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy. Et c'est substantiel.
That is a significant amount of money. And if we look at the impact on GDP, the Environment Canada study that came out a few days ago talks about the impact on GDP at being 0.1%, and the April fiscal outlook talks about a 0.45% impact on the economy, and Ecofiscal says that that could be decreased to almost nothing if we take into account the redistribution of income from those revenues. Did they estimate the cost to the economy with dealing with the climate change problem if we don't act now? And what would be the cost to the economy 10, 20 years down the road? Mr. LG, you're shaking your head no?
But there's a number of estimates out there. The most high-profile one was done by Sir Nicholas Stern, former chief economist for the World Bank, and his estimate was that the costs of inaction on climate change would be relatively equivalent to the costs of both world wars and the Great Depression combined. Different people have higher numbers or lower numbers than that, but that's the order of magnitude of not dealing with climate change. Certainly the insurance industry has seen its payouts go out for severe weather events dramatically over the last 20 years. So they're one of the hardest lobbyists at global climate summits because they're on the paying end of the costs of climate change.
On the paying end, or is it the individual who's on the paying end?
Well, you're right. They're the but their profits are in the middle of that equation, so they're pretty concerned.
Okay, with that, I think we had a very interesting afternoon from all panelists on both panels. I want to thank you very much for coming and taking the time to put together a submission and answering our questions. So thank you again, and with that, meeting adjourned.